Under the brilliant sky, the daily horoscope for Cancer appeared like an omen of a momentous event about to take place right on the campus. With hesitant steps, the thought of having to bravely express her feelings today urged the girl to move forward. She secretly made up her mind that she would definitely do it, as the most sincere words from the bottom of her heart were about to be spoken to touch the other person. The name Do-kyung was called out so decisively that the romantic guy startled and turned to look at the trembling girl standing in front of him. With her cheeks blushing from shyness, the girl stammered, admitting that she liked him a lot, and nervously waited for an unexpected reaction. A sense of shock took over as she realized she had just done something extremely bold, while he could only gasp in surprise. Holding the envelope he just received, he smiled awkwardly and asked Ji-young if she was the one who secretly put it there. The girl looked down in embarrassment, explaining that even though she knew this was very sudden, she really couldn't hold back her burning desire to confess anymore. While her soul was soaring, she confessed that his help in the past had made her heart flutter for a long time and hoped he would accept her. However, the romantic scenario suddenly shattered when the younger brother's ruthless remark echoed out that his older sister's breath smelled awful. Do-kyung blankly asked again about her breath, making Ji-young just want to scream out loud to relieve the frustration surrounding her. She suddenly recognized that jinxing voice and secretly blamed herself for not watching out for Leo as the horoscope had warned earlier. Kang-hyun, the annoying Leo older brother, smirked sarcastically that the smell of her lunch was so strong he could smell it from afar. She frantically protested, but he dealt another critical blow, saying that her crush was extremely sensitive to scents. Ji-young was stunned into silence upon realizing that the goddess image she had painstakingly built for so long had completely vanished into thin air. Seeing Do-kyung step back, awkwardly covering his nose, she frantically explained that she always kept her oral hygiene clean and didn't smell at all. Yet, he clearly showed a nauseous expression and firmly asserted that he himself was also enduring that horrible smell. Her heart completely broke when he bluntly declared that he couldn't date a girl whose breath smelled like garbage. Ji-young suddenly bolted upright in bed with a bright red face, screaming in despair that she didn't smell like that at all, only to be shocked to realize that all the humiliation and bitterness just now were actually just a cruel nightmare. Ji-young sat up and sighed wearily, thinking it was such a terrible dream right before the semester started, and wondered if she should go get an exorcism. While checking her daily horoscope, she thought of Kang-hyun again, her older brother, and also her arch-nemesis who constantly tormented her to the point of haunting her even in her sleep. Memories suddenly flashed back to her elementary school days, when 12-year-old Ji-young was sitting on a park bench and unexpectedly received an innocent confession from a boy. It was Ju Hyunwoo, the gentle neighbor guy who always promised to buy her lots of delicious treats to coax her if she agreed to be his girlfriend. Facing such kindness, Ji-young only wished that he was the one who shared her bloodline instead of that freakish older brother, even though it wasn't a romantic feeling. Just as that thought flashed by, Kang-hyun suddenly appeared and threatened that the senior's wallet would soon be empty if he tried to indulge his sister's appetite. He even added a sinisterly sarcastic remark, bluntly asking if the senior had enough money to satisfy his sister's insatiable gluttony. The harsh words made Hyunwoo just smile awkwardly in embarrassment, while Ji-young was shocked to realize she had just lost the chance to escape her single life. The boy hurriedly turned away after leaving a hasty apology, saying he just remembered an extremely important matter that needed to be handled immediately. He told her to just pretend he had never said anything, and then completely disappeared, leaving behind a sense of regret as the two never saw each other again after that. Glaring daggers at her older brother, Ji-young angrily thought to herself that even though she didn't intend to accept the confession, Kang-hyun was the one who stole that opportunity. As the memories of that day gradually faded, another male student shyly confessed that he had been secretly putting candy into her bag every day. But just as the boy gathered all his courage to take things further, Kang-hyun's terrifying figure radiating dark aura loomed up right behind his back. She thought this interference would end as they grew up, but the terror named Kang-hyun continued to linger, making the boys around her flee in panic. Even in high school, he still casually mocked the frail physiques of the male students and claimed no one was strong enough to date his younger sister. Returning to the present at the age of 20 with the title of being perpetually single, the horoscope about an opportunity to shake off her troubles suddenly kindled hope in the young girl's heart. In an instant, A bold idea suddenly flashed in Ji-young's mind as she recalled the mysterious stories told by her best friend. She remembered how Ju-hee once bragged that she had found true love right after following the guidance at an incredibly famous fortune-telling shop. With a blazing fire of determination in her eyes, Ji-young immediately booked an appointment at 8 in the evening, hoping to get rid of her brother's jinx once and for all. The sound of flipping cards echoed dryly. The death card appeared like a deadly omen, making her swear she wouldn't let anyone ruin her confession this time. Looking at the death and devil cards appearing right from the start, the fortune teller sighed and judged that Ji-young's fate had truly hit a dead end. Faced with the advice to give up on that man, the shocked young girl protested, arguing that their zodiac signs were inherently a match made in heaven. But the fortune teller pointed at the devil card, asserting that there was a tyrant blocking her path and sowing obstacles in her life all this time. With a mysterious look, she prophesied that as long as that awful person was still around, Ji-young would never have a fulfilling love. With tears welling up at her eyes, the poor girl earnestly begged the fortune teller to find a way to stop that devil because she truly desperately wanted to date. In a fit of intense emotion, Ji-young was ready to do anything, making the fortune teller flustered and advising her to calm down to hear the solution. She hesitantly said that there was actually one way left, but this method was a bit special, while the girl affirmed she would trade everything for it. The fortune teller's eyes suddenly flashed with a sly look as she promised to offer a private suggestion, seeing that she was so extremely desperate. Ji-young held her breath, waiting for the fateful moment when the dark hands of the woman opposite her prepared to bring out a life-saving item. Holding up the powerful black beaded bracelet, the fortune teller guaranteed that as long as she possessed it, that tyrant would never be able to ruin her love life again. Ji-young was stunned when she heard the fortune teller quote the price of the bracelet at a whopping 100,000 won, a significant amount of money for her at this time. Under the dim moonlight of the night, she quietly gazed at the black beaded bracelet that now rested on her wrist like a final glimmer of hope. A forced smile appeared on her lips as she blamed herself for actually spending money to buy such a vague spiritual item. Feeling like she had just been scammed made her regretful, but because of her best friend's assurance, she decided to gamble her faith one last time. The tricky problem now was how to get her freakish older brother to wear it too, because she knew full well he would flatly refuse if he knew it was a gift. While she was deeply engrossed in calculation, a hand suddenly grabbed her shoulder tightly, terrifying Ji-young as she was pulled forcefully backward. A deep, warm voice sounded right by her ear, reminding her that she needed to pay more careful attention to her surroundings. In that shocking moment, a familiar scent filled her nose, making her suddenly realize the presence of that man. It turned out to be Do-kyung. He held her tightly, while scolding her for listening to music so loudly that she didn't even notice a motorcycle rushing toward her. The roaring engine echoed through the empty alley as the vehicle sped past, leaving Ji-young still in shock within his protective embrace. In a state where her mind was frozen to process the data, Ji-young dazedly told herself that the current situation was truly too unexpected. She confusingly blurted out a thank you for him saving her life just in time, secretly confirming that this was indeed the man she had been yearning for. Do-kyung smiled and asked why she was being so formal, then teased that she was still as funny as ever, leaving the one who had secretly loved him for years simply frozen. He handed back her earphones and told her she was still very clumsy, despite her vigorous assertions that she was now a grown adult. Gazing at his long, romantic, and incredibly rugged hair, she nervously asked what brought him back here after all these years since graduation. He shared that he had just returned from a trip abroad with his parents, so he bought lots of snacks he thought she would like as gifts. Seeing her as excited as a child, Do-kyung smiled and thoughtfully reminded her to take this gift bag home to share with the whole family. Hugging the gift bag tightly to her chest with a face flushed red with happiness, she secretly likened that if angels were real, they would definitely look exactly like Do-kyung. He laughed and said he was the one who should be thankful, leaving her wondering in her heart why an angel would be best friends with the devil Kang-hyun. In that moment, Ji-young's face suddenly turned bright red as she felt his warmth and gentle gaze directed straight at her. Standing in the middle of the night street at 9:10, Ji-young quietly assessed the situation and realized this was a rare moment to be alone with Do-kyung because her older brother usually went home at 8 o'clock. She swallowed softly, cheering inwardly that this was the golden opportunity to confess without the annoying interference of Kang-hyun. Gathering all her courage, she hesitantly called Do-kyung's name, making the romantic guy startle slightly and then gently ask what she wanted to say. With a face blushing from shyness, she stammered her gratitude and earnestly asked to treat him to a delicious meal as soon as the new semester started. She boldly bragged that she had a lot of money from working hard at her part-time job, making Do-kyung just feel flustered as she generously told him to just eat whatever he liked. Suddenly, a deep voice rang out, interrupting the romantic atmosphere with a highly suspicious question about what the two of them were doing here. A feeling of insecurity along with a familiar dread hit her, making Jae-young tremble and secretly think that this was indeed a bad premonition gradually materializing. Before she could collect herself, she was smacked hard on the head by Kang-hyun, accompanied by an angry scolding for her insolence in daring to call her older brother by his first name. Replying to the remark about him being home late, Kang-hyun smugly bragged about putting in extra hours at the gym and then ruthlessly shooed his friend away, much to his younger sister's resentment. Ignoring his sister, who was clutching her head and grimacing, he casually interrogated Do-kyung about his reason for being here, and then sarcastically remarked that those gifts would give the whole family diabetes. Do-kyung suddenly remembered something and turned to ask Kang-hyun if he was free on the first day of school. While Kang-hyun gruffly asked why, Jae-young was paralyzed with shock and silently pleaded with Do-kyung not to say what she was fearing. Despair welled up in the young girl's mind as she thought about how all the courage she spent making plans was now about to be ruined by her own brother. Despite her turning pale, Do-kyung casually suggested that the three of them go eat together if everyone was okay with it, making Jae-young's world seem to collapse. He briefly paused in bewilderment upon noticing that the atmosphere had suddenly become inexplicably silent and strange. Jae-young vehemently shook her head in protest and tried her best to grip Do-kyung's sleeve to affirm that it absolutely could not happen. Do-kyung smiled awkwardly and in embarrassment when he realized the situation was really tricky, since he knew well that Kang-hyun wasn't fond of being around his sister. Seeing everyone suddenly fall silent, Kang-hyun pressed for a reason and continued to urge Do-kyung to answer about the plans for the first day of school. Do-kyung pressed his lips together in deliberation, his eyes clearly showing hesitation as he tried to find a very tactful way of phrasing it to diffuse the situation. With teary eyes full of pitifulness, Jae-young could only silently mutter prayers, hoping he would understand her miserable feelings at this moment. Do-kyung smiled and suggested the two of them go to school together like they did in high school, making him secretly think he would only compromise this one time. Her older brother Kang-hyun immediately brushed it off due to their different schedules, forcing Do-kyung to cover his embarrassment by bringing up the fact that Jae-young wasn't interested at all either. Seeing her brother satisfied because she was speaking reasonably, Jae-young hastily chimed in and told herself she was finally saved. After Do-kyung said goodbye and reminded Kang-hyun to take his medicine, the shocked young girl wondered if she was about to be alone with her crush. Watching his romantic hair slowly fade from view, Jae-young firmly believed the bracelet's power would help them become a couple soon, if she could get her brother to wear it. Her smug smile suddenly vanished when Kang-hyun smacked his sister hard on the head and scolded her to stop making that creepy face. Clutching her head in pain, Jae-young screamed out a declaration of revenge, making her brother merely smirk sarcastically and say he was extremely terrified. Despite the other party still casually challenging her, the younger sister narrowed her eyes with murderous intent and silently swore to make him regret everything he had done. Taking advantage of the late night, Jae-young sneaked up and carefully put the black beaded bracelet on the tyrant's ankle to begin her retaliation. Since Kang-hyun was a gym addict who always slept early at 10 o'clock, she triumphantly looked at her older brother, deeply asleep and completely unaware of the impending disaster. Jae-young secretly told herself that even though it was unclear how the bracelet would stop her older brother, she would definitely find the answer tomorrow. She happily imagined the scene of Kang-hyun having to kneel and beg for forgiveness. She even planned to take a picture of that humiliating moment as proof. With the determination to wake up 20 minutes early to secretly retrieve the expensive item, Jae-young smiled, hugging her bolster tightly, and fell deep into a slumber. Even though her heart kept beating wildly with anxiety, the young girl's face still clearly showed happiness and anticipation for a miracle to happen. The alarm clock vibrated violently just as the hour hand pointed exactly at 7. shattering the silence of an eventful early morning. A quick hand reached out to turn off that noisy sound immediately, so as not to interrupt the unfinished train of thought. In her deep sleep, Jae-young continuously called out to the heavens and the Mr. 100,001 bracelet as her final spiritual support. Her mind was soaring with a vision of a highly romantic private date with Do-kyung, a dream she had nurtured for so long. She earnestly prayed that the spiritual power would hold that tyrant back, absolutely not letting her older brother have the chance to interfere ever again. However, Kang-hyun was the one who woke up first with a scowling, baffled face, wondering why an alarm clock had appeared in his room. Jae-young woke up in shock and realized she was still in the dark, gloomy room of her annoying older brother. She rubbed her eyes in disbelief upon seeing herself possessing the muscular body of Cha Kang-hyun and wondered what crazy thing was happening. Her soul screamed in despair as she remembered the 100,001 treasure and feared her revenge plan would be exposed. In her new form, she hastily searched for her own whereabouts but found the room completely empty. She thought to herself that if the tyrant discovered the existence of the bracelet, he would definitely throw it away without hesitation. Amidst utter panic, a harsh crashing sound rang out, signaling an agonizing accident that was completely unexpected. The loud shattering noise made the room suddenly chaotic as that massive body unexpectedly tumbled to the ground. Sprawled out on the floor, Jae-young could only groan in pain after the massive impact that left her whole body numb. She winced, tightly gripping the legs that were protesting fiercely, and wondered what the hell had just happened to her body. Her gaze suddenly froze in terror when she discovered that the black beaded bracelet was still tightly wrapped around her older brother's ankle. Jae-young stared dumbfounded at the black beaded bracelet that was still resting prominently on the tyrant's ankle. She broke into a cold sweat because she was certain she had personally put this feng shui item on her brother last night. The bedroom door suddenly swung wide open, making the soul residing in Kang-hyun's body jump in fright at the sight of her own body looming before her. The girl turned pale from shock, only able to stammer out an attempt to ask who the other person was in sheer panic. Looking at her own gloomy face, Jae-young inwardly screamed that she only wanted to stop her brother, not to have their bodies swapped like this. She knelt helplessly on the floor while her older brother, wearing her appearance, stood frozen at the doorway. They tremblingly called out each other's names to confirm the horrifying truth that their souls had officially been swapped. A deadly silence enveloped them as the two siblings could only stare blankly at each other, unable to find an explanation for their current situation. Both simultaneously clutched their heads in despair, silently realizing this was not a nightmare but a cruel reality unfolding. Inside his younger sister's petite body, Kang-hyun clearly showed a scowl and pressed to ask if Jae-young knew what the hell was going on. Flashbacks of the fortune teller's promise and the image of her brother kneeling returned, making Jae-young simply cry out in bitterness. Hiding behind the bookshelf with a face drained of all color, she tremblingly told herself that whether she told the truth or not, a tragic ending was guaranteed for her. The real nightmare began when a hand suddenly reached out and tightly grabbed the hair of that massive body, leaving her no time to react. In the appearance of his small younger sister, Kang-hyun smirked sarcastically and forced her to choose between telling the truth or just taking a beating. A feeling of horror washed over as he started a 3-second countdown, while she resentfully wondered why the option of not getting beaten did not exist at all. Seeing the devilish smile appearing on her own face, she shuddered, realizing her older brother was truly determined to crush her at any cost. At the second count, Jae-young's mind completely collapsed, her eyes spinning in panic as she still couldn't find a way to appease the one possessing her body. Right as the final count rang out, she frantically waved her arms and legs, explaining the entire story about the bracelet and the body swap incident in utter despair. After listening, Kang-hyun thoughtfully observed the black bracelet, asserted that this was the cause of all the trouble, and demanded it be taken off immediately. Even though Jae-young was still bewildered, her older brother gruffly told her to stop making stupid noises and quickly remove that wicked thing. Jae-young, in her brother's body, muttered that calling his younger sister an idiot was too much and wondered if he had a disease that would kill him if he spoke kindly. With trembling hands holding the bracelet, She told herself to put out the fire right in front of her first, while trying to suppress the surging resentment. She spitefully threatened her brother to just wait until she got her body back, but Kang-hyun only asked back in confusion. Discovering something unusual, Kang-hyun, in his sister's appearance, frantically grabbed the phone intending to call the Mocha Tarot shop for an explanation. However, the other end of the line only played a lifeless voice message, leaving both of them in a terrifying silence in the middle of the room. Suddenly, Kang-hyun flashed a radiant and strangely sweet smile in his younger sister's body. He softly called Ji-young's name, making the young girl's soul residing in that massive body tremblingly reply in sheer fear. With eyes flashing with murderous intent, the tyrant ordered his sister to quickly get into position to take the punishment for this mess. Looking at her own terrifying expression, Ji-young broke into a cold sweat and shivered violently, having a premonition that a bad ending was about to strike. Desperate cries for help echoed everywhere as the older brother determinedly used his fists to teach his little sister a lesson of a lifetime right inside his own body. Ji-young could only groan in agonizing pain as she was ruthlessly pinned down to the floor by her own foot. With a raging fire of anger behind him, the freakish older brother forced her to stand up and do another 500 push-ups, even though she was completely exhausted. Lying flat on the floor, Ji-young screamed in despair that she was on the verge of dying and earnestly begged to wait until 7 in the evening to go seek help from the fortune teller. But Kang-hyun only smirked sarcastically. He could not accept having to endure being in his sister's weak body until late evening. Seeing her brother getting angry over improper addressing, she hurriedly humbled herself and apologized modestly in hopes of defusing the tense situation. Ignoring her complaints about being about to throw up, Kang-hyun started recalculating the morning schedule, with 2 general education classes waiting. He casually stepped on his sister's head to interrogate her about her class schedule, forcing her to honestly declare her major and general classes for the day. He secretly calculated that he would definitely run into Do-kyung in the general class and hoped that Ji-young wouldn't make any stupid mistakes to ruin his image. Ji-young was stunned in shock as she sensed another crazy plan gradually forming in the mind of her wicked older brother. She panicked and asked why he was changing clothes, only to be dead silent upon hearing her brother announce that they would both have to go to school in this body swap state. Kang-hyun, in his sister's appearance, crossed his arms and affirmed that he wasn't going to school out of eagerness, but to maintain the chance of getting a scholarship for the whole family. He leaned in close and reminded Ji-young that he didn't expect much other than her having to complete the task of carefully recording the classroom lectures. In her brother's muscular body, Ji-young could only awkwardly agree, while secretly regretting her long-standing scholarship hunting plan. Before leaving, the tyrant did not forget to instruct her to keep it an absolute secret from their parents and try to act as naturally as possible until they could find the fortune-telling shop. His eyes suddenly became more serious than ever as he declared there was still one final, extremely important rule that needed to be strictly enforced right away. With a gloomy, threatening face, Kang-hyun asserted that if she dared to snack or do anything weird with his body, her life would officially enter permanent hard mode. Ji-young was stunned by their ruthlessness, secretly regretting that she had just slipped up and told her brother to just do his part well. The loud slam of the door echoed, making Ji-young shockingly realize that she really had to start this journey of reluctantly impersonating her freakish brother. Her legs kept trembling under the heavy pressure from the explosive warnings of the one occupying her body. Standing in the middle of the campus, the young girl was utterly bewildered to realize the excessive level of closeness between her brother and the idol Do-kyung far exceeded all previous imaginations. Ji-young secretly worried that if even the slightest mistake was exposed, the news would fly straight to the ears of the tyrant Kang-hyun immediately. Suddenly, Do-kyung spoke up and remarked that he looked much better today compared to his weird state yesterday. The romantic guy even added that the blushing and stammering expression from the other day was truly very bizarre, making Ji-young shockingly realize her feelings had been seen through by the other party. Amidst the gloomy atmosphere with the death card manifesting like an omen, she secretly asked herself what she had to do to not ruin things any further. A feeling of despair invaded her as she was certain that her older brother in her body would be the one to destroy this fateful confession. With the determination to keep an absolute distance to preserve the secret, she suddenly flinched when she felt the coldness from a coffee cup unexpectedly touching her cheek. Gazing at Do-kyung wearing glasses looking so elegant, She felt flustered as he pressed her for the reason why his best friend seemed so dazed, like someone who had lost their soul today. Jae-young jolted in fright and tried to take a deep breath to calm down, continuously hypnotizing herself that she was currently the older brother Kang-hyun. Even though she accepted the cup of water and stammered a thank you, her mind still screamed that she absolutely could not maintain her composure in front of her crush any longer. Sipping the drink while stealthily observing, the young girl secretly lamented to the heavens upon realizing that having to be alone with her crush for another hour in the cafe was an unpredictable disaster. Ji-young thought to herself that she needed to get out of here really fast and find a very natural excuse when Do-kyung remarked that her complexion didn't look good. She immediately latched onto the excuse of working out and frantically explained that she was feeling restless and uncomfortable because she hadn't exercised in the morning. She forced a smile and declared she would go for a jog despite her legs protesting fiercely from the incessant aches and pains. Just as she took a step, her brother's massive body suddenly jolted from losing balance, making Jae-young simply cry out in utter bewilderment. The tremendous pain made her so dizzy she couldn't utter a word, while Do-kyung was still watching attentively with deep concern. He quickly supported her and wondered why she insisted on going for a run when even walking normally was proving difficult. In the moment they were close to each other, Jae-young was completely paralyzed by the alluring scent radiating from him and secretly feared her secret would be exposed. She clearly felt the intense fluttering to the point she couldn't say a word, leaving Do-kyung looking at her with a highly skeptical expression. Seeing his friend acting strangely, the romantic guy gently reached out and touched her forehead to check her health condition. He leaned in low to observe closely and then firmly asserted that she didn't have a fever at all, even though the face of that body was flushed red from shyness. Do-kyung worriedly touching his hand to her forehead to check her temperature made Jae-young, in her brother's body, blush furiously and exclaim to herself why she was acting like this. In utter panic, she immediately swung her arm to strongly swat that warm hand away to hide the intense embarrassment surging within. Clutching her wildly beating heart out of fear of being discovered, she frantically used heatstroke as an excuse and hurriedly ran away from her crush's gaze. Standing and watching that muscular back, Do-kyung slightly narrowed his eyes in deep skepticism as he told himself that getting heatstroke in this weather was truly a bizarre thing. He secretly realized his best friend, who was normally always confident, was now continuously avoiding his gaze in a highly awkward manner all day long. Do-kyung grew even more suspicious when recalling the fact that someone who never skipped morning workouts like Kang-hyun was now giving incredibly stupid reasons to make excuses. Seeing the other party stammer a promise to return after jogging while hastily leaving, he inwardly criticized that his friend looked no different from a loser. With a highly rushed goodbye, Jae-young vanished into the crowd, leaving Do-kyung still standing silently, watching her in deep thought. He stood in the middle of the schoolyard, pondering the series of abnormal behaviors from earlier until now, and had a premonition that something wrong was going on. His gaze suddenly became razor-sharp with the decision to secretly follow and uncover the truth behind his best friend's bizarre change. Jae-young, in her brother's body, was completely exhausted, her face flushed red and sweating profusely right as she just started jogging. She couldn't stand steadily, her trembling legs silently thinking that they were about to explode because she couldn't lift another step. Panting and resentful, Jae-young wondered how her older brother could survive in a fitness-obsessed body like this. She secretly cursed him for being a tireless fitness psychopath, while the male students nearby started making remarks about the weird way of walking. Hearing them laugh about a girl blatantly walking into the men's restroom, Jae-young was in shock as she had a premonition that a serious incident had just occurred. She followed the silhouettes of the two guys gossiping and realized the person talking looked very familiar. Looking at the sinister smile of the senior who once offered her alcohol, Jae-young shockingly realized he was the exact annoying ex-man from years ago. A feeling of despair invaded her as she vaguely guessed that the main character in that ridiculous story was none other than herself. Thinking about being teased for 4 years of college, Jae-young could only blankly stare at the small figure causing a commotion in the distance. It turned out to be Kang-hyun in his sister's appearance, casually stepping out of the men's restroom while scolding everyone that there was no need to make a fuss over going to the wrong place. Jae-young, in her brother's body, screamed in anger, asking what the heck her weird brother was doing to her body. She resentfully reproached him that he was the one who told her not to do anything weird, yet now he was blatantly shaming his little sister in public. Right at this moment, Do-kyung suddenly spoke up, commenting that his best friend was acting really strange today as his running speed was unusually slow. In a panic, Jae-young tried to do damage control by lying that she was sick and silently prayed that Do-kyung wouldn't see her real body right now. Realizing her crush's gaze was directed towards a place he shouldn't look, she told herself she had to quickly get him out of this danger zone immediately. However, it was too late as Do-kyung suddenly blurted out her little sister's name and directed a surprised gaze toward the small figure in the distance. The romantic guy slightly narrowed his eyes, wondering why a girl like Jae-young was standing right in front of the men's restroom. Despite her fiercely aching legs, the young girl in the muscular body hurriedly reached out to stop him from looking further in sheer desperation. Just as she managed to utter a plea, that massive body suddenly lost its balance and tumbled toward Do-kyung, instantly throwing the atmosphere into chaos. A resounding crash echoed, leaving the surrounding crowd frozen in shock at the unbelievable scene that had just unfolded right before their eyes. The people around started whispering about the earth-shattering collision right in the middle of the schoolyard that left both of them sprawling on the ground. The phone fell and rolled next to the sneakers on a first day of school full of incidents and humiliation. Jae-young told herself that if this was truly her first kiss, she would rather throw herself into the water than face this reality. She frantically called out Cha Jae-young's name to warn the person occupying her body not to do anything else outrageous. On the contrary, Kang-hyun, in his sister's appearance, was equally frustrated, thinking that Jae-young had completely lost her mind acting so weirdly. He hurriedly lifted his foot, intending to leave the scene, but realized everything was not as easy as he thought. Kang-hyun angrily realized the difference in stride length made all his movements incredibly awkward and difficult. He collapsed in pain and silently cursed himself for not being able to adapt to his sister's small and weak body. His eyes suddenly dropped with sheer annoyance, mixed with confusion at the bizarre change of reality. Meanwhile, Jae-young and her brother's body looked disgusted and continuously dusted her hands off, considering the recent collision to be filthy. The strange young man with slicked-back black hair exuded an overwhelming aura, yelling at the other person to watch where they were going. In his sister's small body, Kang-hyun was stunned, wondering who this rude and insolent guy was to dare raise his voice at him like that. With his inherently hot temper, he immediately shouted back sarcastically that his eyes were indeed just for show, which was why he didn't see him. But the very moment he was about to rush in and fight it out, he suddenly froze, hastily changed his attitude, and stammeringly took the blame. Looking up at the other guy's tall back, Kang-hyun couldn't help but be dizzy, wondering why this guy could possess such an intimidating height. Only then did it shockingly hit him that he was trapped inside Cha Jae-young's short body, so everything around him had become gigantic. His eyes suddenly turned sharply resentful as he realized that bastard still maintained a disdainful attitude, even though he had proactively backed down. Kang-hyun angrily thought to himself that this guy was not only rude but also looked at him like an inferior creature just because of an accidental collision. With 6 years of experience as a class officer, he quickly labeled the other party as someone with a trash personality, a delinquent style, and going to school without even bringing a backpack. Finally, to avoid trouble, Kang-hyun had to swallow his bitter pill and urge him to leave quickly, having a premonition that this was an extremely troublesome type of person to get deeply involved with. Kang-hyun, in his sister's appearance, decided to ignore that rude guy because he noticed another more urgent situation unfolding on the opposite side. As soon as he turned around, he startled the person opposite him so much that their eyes widened in shock, unable to regain their composure at this sudden appearance. Flashing a widely radiant smile, he loudly greeted Do-kyung while still forcefully grabbing the head of his sister, who was standing in a daze. His eyes suddenly flashed dangerously along with a silent threat that Cha Jae-young would definitely be dead meat after this. Facing this awkward situation, Jae-young and her brother's body could only stand frozen, feeling her heart rate increase and her face burning with embarrassment. Do-kyung calmly took off his glasses, radiating the aura of an elegant male god while hoping to receive sympathy from the people around him. Even the mysterious young man in the black shirt couldn't help but show utter bewilderment, completely failing to understand the other person's bizarre actions at this moment. To cover for his sister's blank expression, Kang-hyun hastily apologized on her behalf and explained that his brother hadn't been in his right mind since morning. However, all excuses were eclipsed by Do-kyung's peak visuals, a beauty reputed to be able to lower the IQ of anyone looking at it. Overwhelmed by that charm, the girl in the muscular body could only stammer a few broken words with a bright red face and eyes spinning in sheer confusion. With a flushed face and swirling eyes, Jae-young and her brother's body could only stare blankly when Do-kyung spoke up, suggesting they move somewhere else. While her heart beat wildly due to the extreme closeness of her crush, she still couldn't recover from the unexpected collision just now. Do-kyung slightly bent down and remarked that his friend's body was really heavy now, making the atmosphere even more awkward. Right at this moment, Kang-hyun and his sister's appearance flashed a bright smile and casually announced that he would take his brother away immediately. The tyrant briefly glanced back to check on his sister, who was trapped inside his muscular body. Without a bit of mercy, he reached out, tightly grabbed the hair of his own body, and forcefully dragged it away to Jae-young's shock. With a darkly threatening expression, Kang-hyun demanded to know what the heck she was trying to do, while the little soul of his sister incessantly screamed in protest. In an atmosphere tense to the point of suffocation, the poor girl could only let out broken, fearful sounds from her trembling lips. The eyes of the person occupying the sister's body suddenly grew sharp, growling in order for the other to immediately give a clear explanation. Tears streaming down her face from the pain of having her hair pulled, Jae-young and her brother's body could only sob and beg, saying she really couldn't stand up at all. Jae-young and her brother's body sobbed because of her unbearably aching legs, making Kang-hyun and his sister's appearance feel truly pathetic that the tyrant had to hear whines coming from his own body. Witnessing his friend walking unsteadily, Do-kyung anxiously suggested taking him to the infirmary for a health check immediately. The romantic guy even enthusiastically offered to support him, making Kang-hyun extremely irritated because he couldn't accept being lectured on a workout regimen by an ordinary guy. Despite Do-kyung's advice not to overexert himself, the one occupying his sister's small body was still determined to prove the mettle of a professional gym-goer. An unimaginable scene took place when the petite girl suddenly scooped up an entire muscular body with an extraordinary strength forged over the years. Do-kyung was completely dumbfounded, unable to believe his eyes as he watched those skinny arms effortlessly lift a tall, large man like that. With a triumphant smile, Kang-hyun casually showed off that this was just a small feat, while Jae-young could only cover her face and cry rivers out of sheer humiliation. The tyrant even offered to teach his training secrets to his friend, ignoring his sister, who was so desperate she just wanted to disappear instantly. After wrapping up the dramatic display of strength, the small hand gently turned the doorknob to seek a private space and escape the prying eyes. As soon as he got inside, Kang-hyun suddenly stopped in his tracks when he noticed the phone in his hand vibrating continuously, with a deeply surprised expression clearly showing on his face. Do-kyung was surprised to see Jae-young also appearing in this class, causing the soul inside the male body to be dumbfounded. The romantic guy pondered for a moment and then spoke up to ask about the current condition of his best friend, Kang-hyun. Do-kyung's deep eyes behind his glasses clearly showed concerned anxiety, wondering if the other person was truly okay or not. Seeing the girl's face in front of him suddenly turn unusually red, he panically pressed to know the reason for that strange expression. In the middle of the quiet space, the silent verbal war between the two siblings erupted again as they constantly blamed each other for the troubles they had just caused. With their frustration reaching its peak, the two souls in the swapped bodies incessantly threatened and criticized each other for ruining the first day of the semester. To diffuse the awkward situation, Kang-hyun and his sister's appearance forced a smile and made the excuse that he had just accidentally collided hard. Do-kyung thoughtfully reminded her to take good care of her health, whereas the tyrant only felt annoyed by the continuous bothering. Flashing a gentle smile, the guy told himself that she seemed a bit cold today, so he decided to wait for a more suitable time to talk. A hand gently turning the doorknob signaled a new event about to take place, closing the highly forced dialogue of those who were hiding a shocking secret. Instructor Shin Miei walked into the classroom with a radiant smile and an energetic good afternoon greeting to all the students. She warmly asked about the class's lunch and expressed her excitement to the point that she almost choked from eating too fast just to meet everyone in time. Introducing herself as the head of the Love and Culture course, the 49-year-old female professor exuded youthfulness and sheer passion. She explained that this course would revolve around socializing, dating, and directly experiencing various spectrums of emotion. To her, this was essentially a course where students get to experience a reality dating show right here at school. Sitting in the back, a male student took a quick glance backward and silently groaned upon seeing the highly troublesome presence of Cha Ji-young. Meanwhile, the tyrant Kang-hyun occupying his sister's body showed a look of disdain, wondering why she would choose such a useless course. Professor Shin interrupted the class's train of thought to begin the self-introduction section along with a request to share about their ideal types. She pointed to a student in the front row to start first, making the atmosphere in the class suddenly lively and full of anticipation. Faced with this unexpected challenge, Kang-hyun suddenly froze as he realized he had never once thought about his sister's ideal type. Kang-hyun, in his sister's appearance, sat in the middle of the classroom, racking his brain trying to figure out what to say about his ideal type, so the freaks around wouldn't dare come near him anymore. However, he suddenly stopped when he met the sharp, vengeful glare of the rude young man he had just clashed with outside the men's restroom. In that tiny body, he frustratingly asked himself why he had humbled himself to apologize, yet that petty punk still kept shooting that nasty look his way. The air suddenly grew tense as the other guy's veiny hand tightly gripped the edge of the desk as if suppressing a smoldering fury. Standing before the whole class, the cold young man introduced himself as Pyo Yoon-jae and boldly declared that he absolutely didn't have any specific ideal type. Not stopping there, Yoon-jae dropped a bitterly sarcastic remark aimed directly at those who constantly stalked others and then excused it as caring. He affirmed that he completely loathed the type of people who blindly craved attention, simultaneously throwing a glance so full of contempt that it left Kang-hyun frozen. Being insulted right in public, the tyrant could only widen his eyes in bewilderment and silently curse this lunatic for daring to hallucinate that he had a secret crush on him. Even though the instructor tried to defuse the situation, Kang-hyun felt this punk was even weirder than imagined and had a bad premonition about the days to come. He suddenly realized with shock that if he just let all these terrible things happen, even when they got their bodies back, his little sister Cha Ji-young would have to bear all these humiliating consequences. Kang-hyun and his sister's appearance tightly gripped the desk, silently telling himself that if things kept going on like this, he himself would be in huge trouble. With a flushed, defiant face, he loudly introduced himself as Cha Ji-young and announced that he would take this opportunity to purge all the freaks around him. Pyo Yoon-jae stood silently in the classroom, beginning to recall the not-so-great memories from his past. To him, hating girls wasn't a baseless prejudice, but the result of countless annoyances he had endured for so long. His eyes were tinged with exhaustion as he thought of his gym uniform being stolen for the 5th time, a testament to the excessive harassment. Faced with the surrounding invitations, he bluntly rejected all attention and affirmed that he had zero intention of playing around or eating with them. His disgust only grew as the stalkers blatantly and persistently followed him even outside the school campus. Middle school memories rushed back with images of girls crying and defending themselves, claiming that writing fanfiction about him was just a harmless joke. His hand clenched tightly onto the book containing contents so filthy it left him speechless, which they had been secretly passing around. While the people around only saw it as gossip to laugh at, he found they all possessed the exact same terrifying nature. Since that day, to Yoon-jae, girls had become a group of people he absolutely never wanted to associate or get involved with. Even during family dinners, he remained steadfast in rejecting his relatives' urging to date, asserting that he completely lacked any intention of falling in love. Second older sister Pyo Ji-yoon tried to persuade Yoon-jae to open his heart to dating, believing that his mindset would change once he got a girlfriend. Witnessing her younger brother's uncooperative attitude, Ji-yoon spared no words in mocking his personality and warned him of a future of being single until old age. Yoon-jae furiously slammed the table, demanding that she stop interfering in his private life because he was doing just fine without a shred of romance. With a cold expression, he decisively declared that he had no intention of dating or getting married and told his sister to mind her own business. Ji-yoon angrily called him a bastard, having to witness her younger brother's arrogance after an uncompromising confrontation. Turning to their mother for help, The older sister constantly exaggerated the prospect of Yoonjae withering away in loneliness if he didn't soon find someone to take care of him. Ji-yoon's eyes flashed with cunning as she whispered a battle plan into their mother's ear, making Yoonjae begin to feel a looming instability. The mother suddenly became decisive, threatening to cut off all his allowance if Yoonjae refused to bring a girlfriend home by the end of the semester. Yoonjae was so shocked that he spat out his drink upon hearing that his pocket money would be reduced to a mere 50,000 won, simultaneously realizing his mother had been completely brainwashed. He resentfully blurted out that even elementary school students nowadays received more than that, facing a completely bleak financial future. In response to their mother's worry about the meager allowance, Pyo Ji-yoon immediately reassured her and reminded her to maintain a firm stance to deal with her stubborn younger brother. Instead of softening, the mother decided to deliver a fatal blow by announcing the reduction of his pocket money to the bare minimum, leaving Yoonjae speechless amidst his sister's triumph. With no other choice, he directed a pleading gaze toward his father, who was calmly enjoying his tea, hoping to find an ally to salvage the situation. However, the father, Pyo Jae-sung, who was inherently a wife guy, coldly ordered his son to obey his mother, even imposing an additional fine for his disrespectful attitude. Ji-yoon gloated about her godlike course registration speed, while simultaneously forcing her younger brother to join an infamous reality dating course. In a state of exhaustion and helplessness, Yoonjae could only take a deep breath to suppress the rage waiting to explode at the bizarre arrangement of his weird sister. Eventually, he had to show up at the lecture hall for the love and culture course, incessantly cursing Ji-yoon in his head for pushing him into such an incredibly ironic situation. The feeling of annoyance suddenly multiplied when he suddenly noticed the presence of the bizarre creature he had just clashed with that morning. Yoonjae bitterly told himself that on the very first day of the semester, he was already being relentlessly followed by a crazy stalker, making his already bad mood even worse. He shockingly realized that since this morning, whether it was the 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock class, that strange girl kept appearing out of nowhere and casually sitting right next to him. Yoonjae's eyes dropped with heavy suspicion as he realized that strange girl had been sitting next to him since his previous major class. Although initially, he just wanted to consider it a mere coincidence, his bad premonition about a stalker kept growing. The suspicion immediately turned into a harsh reality when he witnessed her blatantly tailing him right into the men's restroom. He disgustedly concluded that the other party was a crazy pervert and began to shudder at that endless stalking. Since that day, she continuously repeated the same old tricks of intentionally bumping into him and then pretending it was just an accidental collision. Yoonjae realized the girl didn't hesitate to provoke unreasonable arguments just to force him to notice her presence. He loathed the clumsy push-and-pull charade of a person who always secretly observed and tried to approach him at all costs everywhere. Everything reached the peak of annoyance when he discovered both of them were also taking an elective class on dating. Yoonjae wonderingly asked himself if she had hacked his account because this coincidence was heavily tinged with personal calculation. His veiny hand tightly gripping the edge of the desk, he became determined not to let himself be dragged into this girl's manipulative vortex any longer. Pyo Yoonjae stood in front of the class, loudly introducing himself and asserting that he would maintain a firm stance based on his painful experiences from childhood. He expressed utter contempt for those who specialized in stalking others and then used the name of affection to justify their actions. His threatening gaze aimed directly at the other person to check if she was sane enough to understand the recent warning. After his show of dominance, Yoonjae breathed a soft sigh of relief, believing that the girl must be smart enough anyway to have gotten into this prestigious university. He casually declared that his ideal type had to be someone stronger than himself, making the atmosphere suddenly fall into an unusual silence. The petite girl continued to shock all the students by loudly bragging about her ability to lift a total of 500 kilograms despite her fragile appearance. He affirmed that he had absolutely no interest in weaklings or the type with muscles just for show, leaving Do Kyung sitting frozen in astonishment. With an arrogant smile, Kang-hyun demanded everyone not to hold on to false hopes, while Yoonjae only found this narcissistic display truly disgusting and ridiculous. Yoonjae felt incredibly disgusted thinking back to the scene where the strange girl intentionally bumped into him and then blatantly provoked him right to his face. He bewilderingly asked himself what on earth he had just heard as those absurd and arrogant words of introduction entered his ears. A profound contempt swelled in his heart for those with trash personalities, delinquent styles, or those suffering from prince or princess syndrome delusions. Instructor Shin tactfully interrupted the atmosphere with a remark about the diversity of ideal types, then asked the final student to prepare their presentation. Yoonjae gritted his teeth in fury, wondering if she was deliberately taking advantage of the situation to target him directly right in the middle of this class. While Kang-hyun was triumphant for getting back at the arrogant guy, Yoonjae disgustedly wondered how a stalker could be so insanely confident like that. The tyrant told himself that since he had said it to this extent, even someone with the most severe royal disease would have to know their place and back off. As the class ended, Yoonjae coldly stood up and etched the name Cha Jae-young into his mind, along with a declaration that he would make the other party pay fairly for messing with the wrong person. His eyes suddenly darkened dangerously with a firm threat that if she ever dared to show her face in front of him one more time, then the ending for the stubborn person who dared to ignore all his most serious warnings would definitely be incredibly miserable. Yoonjae coldly left the classroom with a firm oath that he would make that audacious person pay so dearly they would never dare show their face at school again. Meanwhile, Jae-young and her muscular body accidentally bumped into a strange woman right in the middle of the hallway, instantly throwing the atmosphere into chaos. She clumsily apologized in a panic, constantly checking on the other person's condition with a sweat-drenched face. The woman slightly narrowed her eyes at the tall young man in front of her, clearly showing suspicion and amazement at his bizarre attitude. The very moment their eyes met, Jae-young suddenly froze as she recognized this face was the mysterious woman she had met yesterday. She screamed in astonishment upon confirming the other person was indeed the tarot fortune-teller, her last ray of hope suddenly burning fiercely. Without any hesitation, she earnestly begged the woman to use magic to return her soul to its rightful body immediately. Witnessing the sight of a muscular young man sobbing loudly, the woman could only cower in fear and wonder if he was crazy. Jae-young immediately held out the black beaded bracelet as proof and affirmed she was the customer who bought this treasure from the tarot shop last night. Seeing the familiar piece of evidence, the woman suddenly fell silent in confusion, as if she also didn't expect things to unfold in this twisted direction. The fortune-teller smugly recalled the moment she lured the naive girl into buying the bracelet at an exorbitant price to ward off a troublemaker. As soon as she saw the other person, she blurted out a welcome to yesterday's lucrative prey, leaving Jae-young and the muscular body utterly bewildered. Realizing her slip of the tongue, the fortune-teller could only force an awkward smile as her intuition warned her of an impending disaster right before her eyes. She hastily deflected by bragging about the highly effective family heirloom, hoping the other party would soon forget the painful past. In her brother's appearance, Jae-young pouted sulkily and earnestly pleaded for an explanation on how to return to her rightful body. The mysterious woman affirmed that the chance was still there, but only after the troublesome issues with the person wearing the bracelet were thoroughly resolved. The little girl in the giant body stood dazed and wondering, completely failing to understand the true meaning of untying the knot she had just mentioned. She explained that as long as the other person stopped interfering and her romance was successful, the bizarre curse would automatically disappear. A deep, passionate kiss with her secret crush was presented as the key to reversing this ironic situation. Jae-young shuddered in horror upon hearing that their souls would continuously swap every 24 hours until both of them truly learned how to understand each other's feelings. The tarot fortune-teller slightly narrowed her eyes at Jae-young, then dropped a highly suggestive remark about the fateful bracelet. She revealed that this treasure inherently only worked its swapping effect between those with the closest blood relations. Seeing the other person's pathetic expression, she laughed loudly and mocked that she was truly unlucky that the tyrant turned out to be her own biological brother. In the giant body, Jae-young screamed in anger at the irony of fate, even bringing up her idols to compare this suffering. Without a care, the fortune-teller casually turned away and advised her to soon find a way to compromise with her weird brother. Despite Jae-young crying and calling her back, she still hastily ran away using the excuse of being afraid of the professor, leaving the girl standing dazed in the middle of the hallway. Standing silently for a while, Jae-young suddenly winced in pain as the terrible muscle aches from her brother's workout routine began to flare up. Tears streaming down her face from helplessness, she began contemplating having to humble herself to negotiate with Kang-hyun in order to escape this situation. Conversely, Kang-hyun and his sister's body showed sheer contempt, believing that all the fortune teller's words were just a cheap scam. The tyrant pressed to know why his little sister could naively sit and listen to that nonsense, making Jae-young only able to laugh it off since she had anticipated this reaction. Kang-hyun and his sister's body angrily deemed this whole situation completely absurd and demanded the immediate elimination of the fortune teller, making Jae-young and her brother's body panic out of fear of losing her old body forever. Ignoring the warnings about leaving a criminal record on his sister's body, the tyrant brother still boiled with murderous intent and believed that violence was the fastest way to force that scammer to give a satisfactory answer. He pressed to ask if his sister really wanted to follow the words of that fanatic fortune teller, while Jae-young firmly believed it was the most surefire method for both to return to normal. The atmosphere suddenly became stifling as Kang-hyun unexpectedly dug deep into her private life, interrogating whether she already had a secret crush to fulfill the pact. Standing under the streetlight, he brought up the bizarre rule of having to lock lips with someone she liked to regain her body, making Jae-young flustered and wondering if such a person truly existed right now. Upon hearing her brother promise not to interfere if that was the only way, the girl in the muscular body secretly rejoiced and began to hope that this compromise would actually work. However, Kang-hyun immediately crossed his arms with sheer authority and ordered his sister not to stall but honestly confess the identity of that person right now. He declared he wanted to know who that guy was to prepare to crush him, making Jae-young swallow hard in anxiety and wonder if she should place her trust in this devilish brother. In the moment her mind was still in turmoil over the threats, she suddenly gasped in astonishment upon feeling that her breath and skin had miraculously changed. The miracle finally happened as Jae-young burst into happiness upon realizing she had truly returned to her old body, sitting peacefully in her familiar private room in her pink pajamas. The tarot fortune teller flashed a meaningful smile, confirming that swapping souls every 24 hours was indeed an extremely terrible experience. Jae-young was stunned to realize her words perfectly matched the harsh reality she was enduring right now. Memories of a day ago flashed back when she had jumped for joy thinking she had escaped the grip of her tyrant brother. But reality was cruel as Kang-hyun and his sister's body continuously forced her to confess the identity of her secret crush. Hearing the threat to beat the other guy to a pulp, the girl in the muscular body could only sweat bullets in fear for her crush's life. Faced with the choice of whether to trust her weird brother, her lips trembled slightly as she was about to spill her deepest secret. A series of memory fragments about times her brother ruined her romantic affairs flashed back like a warning, making Jae-young suddenly snap to her senses. She hurriedly fled in panic and told herself she almost made a fatal mistake trying to compromise with the devil. Burning anger flared up, causing the veins on that small face to bulge with a fierce and extremely dangerous look. Kang-hyun and his sister's appearance immediately lunged to strangle his own body and growled a threat to crush the other party if she dared to play any more tricks. Jae-young in the muscular body continuously groaned and cursed her brother for being a psychopath, as she was choked by his sheer strength to the point of being unable to breathe. However, Kang-hyun and his sister's appearance only responded with a darkly sinister face, coldly pressing to know if she truly wanted to keep staying silent. Noticing his sister's stubbornness, he shoved her to the ground and declared he would personally go to the Mocha Tarot shop to put an end to this body swap. Ironically, a notification on his phone poured cold water on his plan, stating the tarot shop was temporarily closed simply because the owner felt tired after the school enrollment day. Kang-hyun helplessly held his face in the middle of the street, silently lamenting that it seemed the whole world was turning its back and nothing was going his way. Still unable to quell his anger, his sharp eyes full of irritation glared at his sister, as if looking for a way to vent all his frustration on her. Hiding behind the wall, Jae-young stealthily observed her brother's expression and silently affirmed that once he became stubborn, he would never listen. Under the dim streetlight, the two siblings faced each other and recalled the fortune teller's bizarre rule of having to kiss their crush to be able to return. Realizing that forcing it right now would only cause more trouble, Jae-young in the massive body decided to temporarily let things go for today. Afterwards, she glared and threatened her brother that if they still couldn't return to their old bodies tomorrow, he would definitely face an incredibly disastrous end. Jae-young cautiously asked her brother if he would stop sabotaging her once everything returned to normal, making Kang-hyun agree while secretly cursing his little sister's intelligence, wondering how she even got admitted into this school. The girl in the muscular body jumped for joy for receiving a firm promise from her brother, and then the storyline quickly brings us back to the present reality. In her familiar pink pajamas, Jae-young excitedly enjoyed the feeling of a light body no longer aching with muscle pain and silently marveled at the glorious life of a normal teenage girl. While absorbed in her newly regained freedom, her face suddenly turned serious as she abruptly remembered an extremely crucial matter that she couldn't afford to miss. Sitting at her desk with a notebook, Jae-young anxiously calculated her upcoming date with Do-kyung and began to fear that the wicked soul-swapping cycle would ruin all her plans again. She carefully used a red pen to circle a heart on the 5th day on her desk calendar, silently telling herself this would be the most ideal time and planning to ask for his opinion when they met. Before preparing to head to school for a new day full of upheavals, Jae-young decided to open her phone to read her horoscope in the hope of finding some emotional support for herself. Sitting blankly in the classroom enveloped by a gloomy atmosphere, her mind was completely focused on the mysterious predictions specifically for Cancers today. Seeing the message about an important opportunity to cast off her long-standing anxieties, Jae-young blushed happily and absolutely believed that fate was truly smiling upon her. However, the cruel reality emerged when a new female student had just finished her self-introduction, and the group started dividing up the tasks, making Jae-young just want to scream because the current situation was too terrible. The horoscope for Cancer began to reveal unpredictable fluctuations in Jae-young's destiny on this turbulent first day of school. She was devastated to hear the handsome Do-kyung announce that his schedule on the 5th was fully booked, and he wanted to postpone their date to the following week. The warning text about plans collapsing appeared like a splash of cold water, reminding her to patiently observe instead of trying to force things. Facing the beyond expected popularity of her secret crush, Jae-young could only force a smile to hide her surging disappointment. Watching Do-kyung's dashing back leave to prepare for another lunch date, she reassured herself that this delay actually wasn't too bad. Yet the real worry struck when the horoscope warned about someone nearby giving her a hostile glare filled with smoldering animosity. Faced with a terrifying aura radiating from the silhouette of a hidden enemy, the advice to be cautious in every word and action made her shudder. Jae-young's mind immediately flashed back to the cold face of Pyo Yoon-jae, the guy who had kept her on edge since the previous class until now. The memory of his sharp, resentful glare when she accidentally met his eyes while bending down to pick up a pen made the surrounding atmosphere thoroughly uneasy. Suddenly pulled back to reality by Cheon Minji's hand, Jae-young frantically apologized for spacing out and hastily confirmed their joint research task to avoid offending her partner. Minji announced that Yoon-jae would do the PowerPoint while Tae-shik handled the presentation, making Jae-young smile and silently thank the enthusiastic support from her teammates. Her female partner secretly mocked Jae-young's abilities, while she panicked and told herself to try her best so she wouldn't be hated by everyone in the group. The request to select a specific corporate incident for the next class was issued along with exchanging phone numbers to set up a group work chat. Right at this moment, upperclassman Choi Tae-shik unexpectedly reminded them about the freshman orientation party tonight and requested that all members must definitely attend. While everyone around was extremely excited, Jae-young looked bewildered and utterly confused because it seemed she had been completely unaware of this event. Seeing his junior looking clueless, Tae-shik immediately explained that this important announcement had been posted publicly in the class's general group chat since early morning. Jae-young startled, recalling the scene where she was so busy rejoicing over getting her body back that she missed the message and had to awkwardly use a personal excuse to cover it up. After hearing the confirmation that the party was mandatory, she hurriedly nodded to confirm her attendance and secretly felt lucky she hadn't accidentally caused a disaster. The atmosphere in the group suddenly grew tense when Tae-shik directed his gaze at Pyo Yoon-jae, pressing for a reason why he remained silent and refused to give a response. Yoon-jae's cold face fleetingly showed a highly suggestive, thoughtful look about the orientation party, signaling an upcoming night of reunion with many unpredictable variables. Yoon-jae smirked, affirming that of course he would attend since this was a mandatory gathering for the whole class. Jae-young blushed in astonishment, wondering if he had just smiled at her, and silently thought this was a good opportunity for herself. The scene of the orientation party opened in a bustling restaurant with a cozy atmosphere and dark red brick walls. The waiters continuously brought trays of piping hot food to the tables amidst the vibrant atmosphere of the freshman group. Sitting in front of a heaping plate of fried chicken, Jae-young's face was flushed red from being drunk while her friends around kept chanting her name. Observing from afar, Yoon-jae silently guessed that this girl's true nature would definitely reveal itself as soon as she got some alcohol in her system. Seeing the small girl constantly trembling in fear, he felt extremely annoyed and irritated at that somewhat exaggerated expression. Holding a soda can, Yoon-jae clicked his tongue, thinking that if things kept going like this, everyone would soon view her as a victim of bullying. Laughter rang out when Jae-young lost 5 consecutive rounds of cards, making him doubt if this was the same person who had stalked him yesterday. He recalled how she had treated him like a stranger during the day instead of clinging to him like before, and every time the two accidentally locked eyes, Yoon-jae unexpectedly paused as a distant stream of memories about the past suddenly rushed back vividly in his mind. He recalled those frustrating childhood years when a little girl used crying tricks to falsely accuse him of pushing and hating her. Facing the teacher's doubtful questioning, the young boy Yoon-jae back then could only endure in silence the wrongful title of a bully. Returning to reality, he silently swore not to let anyone use that same old victim script to turn him into a villain once again. Meanwhile, Jae-young, with a face flushed from intoxication, was stammering to ask her senior if she could drink in installments instead of downing it all at once. That silly request made the people around burst out laughing and comment that this brainless act truly matched her crazy personality. Ignoring her pleas for an alternative, Senior GIBM still laughingly forced her to drink all the alcohol in her helplessness. Unexpectedly, a veiny hand quietly reached out and grabbed the glass of beer, right before the astonishment of everyone present at the party table. Yoon-jae downed the entire glass of beer on her behalf to the shock of his friends, silently telling himself he would never fall for this girl's tricks again. The decisive slam of the glass on the table served as a firm affirmation that he had seen through all the tricks and would personally end the game right here. Yoon-jae smirked, declaring that he was the Black Knight who had just saved the day, and demanded the right to choose the next game for the whole table. The hero saving the beauty scene made his friends erupt into teasing about the two's ambiguous relationship, leaving Jae-young blushing and denying it in despair. The flustered girl pleaded with everyone not to ship them because this was only the first time they had met at this party. Facing the cheers about love at first sight, Yoon-jae cast a cold glance and silently despised her deceitful excuse of meeting for the first time. The excessive teasing made Jae-young genuinely annoyed, forcing the people around to laugh it off and promised to stop to diffuse the atmosphere. Brushing aside all the noise, the bad boy focused his gaze on his prey and silently challenged how long this girl could keep up her act. The announcement of a random game chosen by Yoon-jae himself rang out, promising a highly dramatic confrontation about to begin. A pair of hands with masculine veins was raised high, signaling the start of the folding fingers game, a harsh test of truth. With a sinister smile, Yoon-jae threw the decisive blow by demanding that anyone who had feelings for him must fold a finger immediately. The entire party table fell into a frozen state in sheer shock at the direct and highly arrogant attack of the cold guy. A female student at the table couldn't help but marvel at Pyo Yoon-jae's insane level of confidence and decided to fold her finger immediately, unable to resist his masculine charm. Jae-young flinched at the unexpected attack, her mind in turmoil as she silently wondered if he was deliberately targeting her, or if it was just a general challenge. Minji also spared no words praising Yoon-jae's captivating boldness, causing the friends around to start teasing about her intention to hit on him. Under the table, a highly suggestive foot touch unexpectedly occurred while the chatter about the cold guy's overwhelming popularity was still endlessly echoing. Yoon-jae's sharp gaze suddenly locked onto Jae-young, coldly questioning why she still hadn't folded her finger, firmly asserting that she genuinely liked him. Cornered, the girl could only stammer denials in utter panic, her mouth constantly repeating contradictory rejections to hide her embarrassment. The guy let out a sinister smirk upon hearing her feeble denial and began preparing to play his trump card to expose everything. Jae-young froze with a face flushed red with shame when Yoon-jae publicly brought up how she had tailed him right into the men's restroom early in the morning. The provocative foot touch under the table once again made her startle in shock, clearly feeling the danger gradually surrounding her right at the party table. In an atmosphere tense to the point of suffocation, Yoon-jae continued pressing close with the question of why she was still stubbornly refusing to fold her finger when the truth was crystal clear. Jae-young blushed and stammered, admitting her feelings in extreme embarrassment when Yoon-jae smirked and sarcastically questioned her back. The romantic guy saw right through everything, casually commenting that her behavior truly made others raise a big question mark. The entire party table fell into a terrifying silence when he publicly exposed the fact that she had stalked him right into the men's restroom. In extreme panic, Jae-young could only frantically deny it and try to find an excuse for her crazy actions that morning. However, another female student suddenly spoke up with a highly suspicious look, pressing to know if those vicious rumors were actually true. She was stunned by the word rumor, secretly feeling a bad premonition gradually enveloping her entire reputation. The information that senior Kim Jun-sung was spreading the story all over the school about a freshman girl sneaking into the men's restroom made her completely collapse. Her tablemate continued to add that she didn't expect the story to be true and affirmed that stalking was an incredibly terrifying behavior. Receiving a warning that stalking would be ostracized, Jae-young could only clutch her chest and desperately beg everyone to give her a chance to explain. However, Min-ji delivered a fatal blow by coldly asserting that there was no satisfactory excuse for this shameful stalking behavior. Jae-young shuddered in horror at the accusation of a criminal mindset, while malicious rumors about her past began to rise strongly. The incessant whispers about her being a school violence perpetrator who forced a victim to transfer made the atmosphere incredibly tense. Her face flushed red with grievance. She choked back tears, denying everything and asserting that there was once a beautiful friendship between her and that person. But a cold voice suddenly rang out calling her a liar, shattering all her efforts to clear her name in absolute contempt. Standing alone between reality and memory, Jae-young was cornered by the question of why that friend left in silence, if not bullied by her. She bowed her head helplessly in the middle of the bustling party table, letting the darkness of humiliation envelop her gradually collapsing mind. Observing that silence, Yoon-jae secretly thought the other party was racking her brain to find a way out but affirmed that this time she wouldn't be able to escape her crime. The romantic guy triumphantly thought he had pressed hard enough to expose her true nature, and this would be the end of her stalking life. However, Yoon-jae suddenly froze, his eyes widening in utter astonishment when he unexpectedly heard muffled sobs coming from the opposite side. Before everyone's astonishment, Jae-young cried while desperately repeating her assertion that she absolutely didn't do those terrible things as rumored. Jae-young sobbed bitterly in extreme grievance, fearing that no one would be willing to put their trust in her feeble explanations. Yoon-jae stood completely frozen, seeing the stalker girl actually shedding tears. He began to panic, wondering if he was pushing her too far. Memories of an arrogant and defiant Jae-young suddenly flashed back, making Yoon-jae feel incredibly confused by her rapidly changing personality. Min-ji quickly played the role of a kind sister, comforting Jae-young and declaring absolute trust in her, while promising to punish the one who spread those malicious rumors. Before the sinister smile hidden behind Min-ji's gentle exterior, Jae-young could only sniffle in agreement that violence was evil while her heart was filled with unease. The atmosphere suddenly became tense as Min-ji turned to criticize Yoon-jae, demanding that he take action to be responsible for this mess. She spared no words scolding Yoon-jae for making a freshman cry, while forcing him to immediately apologize or comfort her. The romantic guy closed his eyes and sighed wearily as he went from being the one in the right to a sinner, silently cursing the troublesome situation surrounding him. Yoon-jae's cold eyes briefly glanced around with high vigilance. He began to realize another malicious scheme was gradually taking shape. The crowd's whispers about him bullying a junior began echoing throughout the restaurant, signaling a huge trouble about to explode. Yoon-jae suddenly sweat bullets imagining the scene where his weird sister Ji-eun would tattle to their dad about him making someone's daughter cry, only to get his allowance completely cut off. While he was in a panic, Min-ji continued to add fuel to the fire by shouting, demanding that he shouldn't stand still like a statue, but must quickly deal with the consequences immediately. Silently cursing this extremely troublesome situation, Yoon-jae frowned in annoyance, thinking that things were gradually exceeding his limit of tolerance. The decisive sound of chair legs scraping against the floor signaled that the cold guy no longer had the patience to continue sitting still and take the heat in front of the crowd. He stood up, declaring he would talk privately with Jae-young in a secluded place, away from the prying eyes eagerly waiting to gossip around them. With an overwhelming gaze, Yoon-jae dropped an authoritative demand, forcing the sniffling girl to step outside and confront him directly. But Jae-young appeared even more terrified and clung tightly to Min-ji, making her partner take advantage of the situation, loudly forcing him to have a gentler attitude towards women. Ignoring those dissuasions or that uncooperative attitude, Yoon-jae coldly turned his back and left a message that if she wanted to clear up the misunderstanding, she should follow him voluntarily. He asserted this was the last chance he was giving her to clarify everything, leaving her still trembling amidst the tense atmosphere of the party. A dry click echoed, bringing reality back, marking the moment Jae-young shockingly realized her first emotions when her soul officially returned to its original body. Jae-young excitedly called her brother and reminded him of his firm promise that he would never be allowed to interfere in her love life one more time. However, Kang-hyun replied with a murderous glare and an insult about his sister's intelligence, since she could smile brightly in this terrible situation. Faced with her brother's terrifying intimidation, Jae-young could only tremble and hide while he continuously mocked the weird actions she was doing. She frantically begged for sympathy and promised to try her best to bring everything back to normal without causing him any more trouble. Despite that, Kang-hyun still couldn't hide his disdain when he pressed to ask how a loner like her planned to turn the situation around in just 2 weeks. Jae-young blushed, admitting she already had a crush and planned to set up a date with a romantic confession right at the end of today. Looking at her firm eyes and hands tightly gripping the mattress, it seemed she was highly determined for this risky gamble of love. The tyrant brother's fiery rage immediately burned fiercely when he imagined his sister about to lock lips with a complete stranger he hadn't vetted. Ignoring the scoldings, Jae-young hurriedly left to make it to class on time while constantly groaning because her legs ached as if torn apart after her brother's torturous workouts. Watching his little sister's struggling figure running away, Kang-hyun could only cross his arms in frustration and wonder if she was truly too blind to trust her own judgment. Kang-hyun felt his blood boil thinking about those scumbags trying to approach his sister just to tease and ruin his life. He shuddered imagining the naive Jae-young surrounded by perverted stalkers with highly suspicious actions. He silently mocked the fact that his sister could get involved with promiscuous men ready to flirt with anyone, and wondered why she had such terrible taste in people. Fingers tapping anxiously on the table, Kang-hyun silently calculated and realized the probability of Jae-young resolving this mess by herself was almost zero. He feared that if he just left it to her naive mind, not only his gym schedule but even his GPA would vanish into thin air. His eyes suddenly turned sharp and decisive. Kang-hyun told himself that since things had come to this, he could no longer stand by and watch. Right after that, the tarot fortune teller appeared with a mysterious smile, offering tea and coffee as if wanting to use hospitality to hide the troubles she had caused. Sitting opposite the one holding the swapping secret, Kang-hyun coldly asserted that he would never trust or touch anything she served. Before her calm and mocking face, he cursed internally and wondered if this woman was truly the incarnation of Satan. The storyline unexpectedly rewound to 3 hours ago at the tarot shop, when the fortune teller cleverly tried to turn away a man claiming to be a brother desperately looking for a sister. The tarot fortune teller stood dazed inside the shop, silently wondering why there were up to 3 consecutive booked customers, but no one showed up. Feeling something was wrong, she hastily pushed the door to go outside and check if she had accidentally hung the closed sign. As soon as she stepped onto the street, she shockingly recognized the familiar face of Do-kyung casually standing there spouting baseless rumors about her fortune-telling shop to potential customers. The fortune teller was stunned to see that romantic guy using an incredibly sincere face to advise everyone not to foolishly become victims of a scam. Witnessing young girls continuously nodding in gratitude for being saved, she could only stand frozen in anger, realizing she was the one being publicly humiliated. Before the crowd's fanatic admiration, Do-kyung flashed a dazzlingly captivating smile as an affirmation of his righteous actions. Seeing the blushing faces of the female students, the fortune teller bitterly realized his looks were the sole reason why his lies carried such weight. Despite the initial ignorance, Kyung still persistently waited hour after hour, demonstrating a remarkable stubbornness and determination to confront. The dry creak of the door hinges echoed in the silent late night, signaling the shop owner's submission to the stubborn young man's relentless perseverance. With a darkly sinister face, the fortune-teller had to grit her teeth and invite Kyung inside to finish off this extremely troublesome matter. Kyung smirked and crossed his arms, casually pressing to ask the fortune-teller if she was now truly ready to spend time chatting with him. The tarot shop owner forced a smile on the outside but cursed internally, wanting to quickly resolve this to kick this nuisance out the door. He began to dig deep into the origins of the magic bracelet and brought up the troubles this item had caused for those involved. Faced with the questioning that the creator of the bracelet was his grandmother, the woman could only nod to confirm in unease. Holding the treasure up under the dim candlelight, Kyung began to analyze the psychology of a grandmother who always yearned for her grandchildren to get along. He looked straight at the other person and pressed to ask if there was truly no other method to return to the original body besides reconciliation. The assertion that the secret keeper would never reveal all the methods made the fortune-teller shockingly realize she had been too careless. Kyung firmly stated that a dangerous soul-swapping item must definitely possess an accompanying safety mechanism to prevent risks. His eyes suddenly turned sharp as he bluntly declared that the person he wanted to hear the answer from was absolutely not her. He decisively requested a face-to-face meeting with the grandmother who crafted the bracelet, leaving the shop owner frozen in extreme astonishment. The tarot fortune-teller pressed to ask if such an agreement was okay, marking a new turning point in Kang-hyun's journey to find the truth. Standing in front of the closed shop, he told himself 2 more days would be the deadline and reassured himself that this was still better than trusting his foolish sister. Kang-hyun hurriedly checked his phone with the intention of demanding Jae-young keep her schedule clear the day after tomorrow, while determining to train to make up for the interrupted days. As soon as the call connected, before he could finish his instructions, a strange voice unexpectedly rang out from the other end of the line, freezing the atmosphere. His face clearly showed extreme panic as he confirmed it was indeed his sister's number, but the person answering was a complete stranger. On the other side, Minji, with a highly calculating face, casually introduced herself as a senior from the same department and didn't forget to mock the bastard brother names saved in the contacts. Hearing that Jae-young was dead drunk and receiving a request to come pick her up, Kang-hyun immediately pressed for the address with a highly uneasy mind. The scene shifted to a quiet alleyway where the 3 main characters finally met, signaling an inevitable confrontation. Kang-hyun appeared with towering murderous intent, his fists clenched in anger witnessing the eyesore scene, and dropped a firm threat towards the other party. Under the dim city lights, all complex developments began to be summarized in preparation for the unpredictable variables about to crash down on Jae-young. In the quiet alley, Jae-young hurriedly explained that sneaking into the men's restroom was just an accident because her soul was swapped into her brother's body after buying the fateful tarot bracelet. However, Yoon-jae wasn't swayed in the slightest. He casually challenged her to just ask passers-by to see if anyone was foolish enough to believe such an absurd script. She still insisted on defending the truth and affirmed this was indeed the first time the two met face-to-face, making the romantic guy start suspecting he was being led by the nose. With sharp eyes, Yoon-jae pressed close and demanded what solid evidence she planned to provide to support her highly fictional words just now. Jae-young frantically tried to search her pockets for the bracelet or suggest meeting the tarot shop owner to confront them, but he immediately poured cold water on it, calling those pointless antics. He showed clear annoyance at her clumsy excuses and affirmed that only honesty would help her escape trouble this time. Yoon-jae coldly offered a final agreement that if she promised to end her stalking behavior and stay away from him, he would generously erase all previous grudges. In extreme resentment, Jae-young beat her chest and screamed in despair that she was completely innocent and the troublemaker this morning wasn't her. Yoon-jae's face clearly showed anger as he questioned if she was so delusional that she lost her mind and denied the obvious truth. Jae-young, blushing fiercely, decisively declared he should stop being narcissistic because her type was never the black-haired male lead, but rather warm, light-haired guys like Kyung. Jae-young earnestly begged Yoon-jae to stop misunderstanding her, but his sharp gaze showed that his suspicion had not subsided at all. Worried about the malicious rumors ruining her reputation, she prompted the playboy to secretly plot a way to force her to expose this charade herself. Yoonjae's lips curled into a wicked smirk as he decided to set a test to verify the truth directly from the stalker girl's mouth. He pressed her, asking if her soul really would swap into her brother's body tomorrow as she claimed, whether she would dare to face a bet. Yoonjae commanded her to prove her identity while in male form, secretly believing he could easily get her to slip up. Thinking she had found a ray of hope to clear her name, Jae-young beamed with joy and hastily nodded in agreement, without hesitation. However, her joy was short-lived when his face suddenly turned serious, accompanied by the declaration of an extremely harsh condition. He coldly threatened that if she failed to prove herself, the price to pay would be immediately dropping out of school and disappearing on the spot. Jae-young froze in absolute shock, the words drop out sounding like a death sentence handed down to the poor girl's future. Yoonjae smirked, mocking her flustered state and asserting that if she was telling the absolute truth, she had nothing to fear from this bet. Yoonjae smirked provocatively as he asked if the girl in front of him was feeling scared of this high-risk wager. Suppressing her trembling, Jae-young firmly asserted that she was not wavering at all and was about to ask for the exact time for tomorrow's confrontation. Yet that confidence quickly vanished as she silently cursed her bad luck and suddenly felt a terrifying murderous aura closing in from behind. Under the dim streetlights of the deserted street, the tall figure of her older brother Kang-hyun suddenly appeared, causing the atmosphere to instantly freeze. Kang-hyun appeared with a dark face and intense anger upon catching his younger sister secretly meeting the guy he utterly despised. A brief memory suddenly flashed back, recalling Jae-young's determined declaration that she had a dream guy and would officially confess her feelings tonight. Looking at the sudden arrival of the unfamiliar guy, Yoonjae silently speculated and tried to piece together clues to identify the lucky guy who held the stalker girl's heart. A furious rage erupted as Kang-hyun yelled, questioning her audacity to insolently order him not to interfere in her love life. Terrified, Jae-young shrank against the corner wall, trembling constantly as she wondered if her very breathing or any action today had accidentally provoked her tyrant brother. Finally, she had to muster all her courage to step out and earnestly beg him to restrain his anger so they could sit down and resolve the issue like adults. Kang-hyun sarcastically called his sister a civilized adult and asked why she wanted to date someone who had just brought her to tears. Dripping with sweat, Jae-young frantically denied it, secretly fearing how much of the truth about the soul swap her tyrant brother had overheard. Smirking contemptuously at her explanation of a mere coincidence, Kang-hyun exuded a heavy pressure that left her standing frozen in fear. Her brother's stern shout calling her name echoed through the quiet alley, making Jae-young flinch and tremble like a timid rabbit before a tiger. With a dark, sinister face, Kang-hyun ordered his sister to cut the nonsense and go inside right now to pack her luggage. He declared that they would have a serious confrontation when they got home, making the poor girl so frightened that her face drained of all color. His patience running thin, the tyrant threatened to finish off his sister if she dared to hesitate any longer and began a deadly countdown. At the very first count, Jae-young bolted for her life in absolute terror to escape her brother's wrath. Kang-hyun's eyes flickered with a moment of contemplation as he told himself he originally had no desire to meddle in his foolish sister's mess if he could help it. Yoonjae stood quietly watching her leave, clicking his tongue in thought that she seemed to be stepping into a minefield on her own, so he couldn't just stand by and ignore it. Kang-hyun directed a murderous glare toward Yoonjae, privately resolving to deal with this troublesome guy himself right away. He approached and coldly warned that there wouldn't be a third strike, threatening that if he dared to loiter around his sister ever again, he would definitely be finished, leaving Yoonjae standing bewildered, wondering what on earth the concept of loitering that the guy just mentioned actually meant. On the empty street, he began to ponder whether the definitions of a flatterer or a stalker were actually applying to his own situation. The sudden silence was shattered by the continuous vibration coming from his phone, forcing Yoonjae to immediately turn his attention to his pocket. The screen lit up with a panicked text begging him absolutely not to reveal anything to her brother, or else she would meet a tragic end. Yoonjae let out a weary sigh, looking up at the night city sky, privately wondering what crazy nonsense that girl was blabbering about. Meanwhile, in another location, a phone continued to vibrate persistently against a wooden table, as if signaling an urgent matter. The call's signal abruptly died out after a dry click, severing all connection and leaving behind a mysterious black screen. Do-kyung slouched exhaustedly over his computer in the quiet cafe, feeling drained by the barrage of messages and the fear of being confronted by Kang-hyun. Jae-young, in her brother's body, looked at the interrogating texts and felt privately frustrated by the bizarre logic that led her brother to think she liked Pyo Yoon-jae. She scowled in outrage seeing her brother backtrack right after promising not to interfere, making her even more determined to keep the secret of her dream guy to the very end. In male form, Jae-young furiously typed back against her tyrant brother's control, silently cursing Kang-hyun for being so annoying. As she was absorbed in venting her anger onto her phone screen, she startled and looked up when she unexpectedly heard a polite call from a stranger behind her. Appearing before her eyes was a girl with long black hair, hesitatingly offering an apology to initiate a somewhat abrupt request. With a deadpan serious face, the strange girl did not hesitate to express that she really loved the seat she was currently occupying. Standing in the quiet cafe, the girl continued to press her, bluntly asking him to yield that seat to her. Jae-young broke into a cold sweat of embarrassment, glancing around and wondering why she was being so stubborn when there were plenty of empty seats in the cafe. Being naturally timid, she had no choice but to graciously yield the seat and focus on her laptop to work on the group project with Garam and Yoonjae. The rhythmic clatter of typing resonated steadily through the quiet space, marking a day of hard work for the girl and her new body. Do-kyung startled when he felt the continuous vibration of his phone sitting on the table. He hurriedly checked the message from Yoonjae requesting a meeting, quickly confirming the location at the back gate at noon. He let out a sigh of relief knowing he hadn't been ignored as he had previously feared. Meanwhile, Jae-young, in her brother's muscular body, was giddily planning to grab some pork tonkatsu to nourish herself. However, the smile instantly faded from her face when she suddenly caught sight of a bizarre scene right in front of her. She froze seeing the strange girl still persistently occupying the seat she had just given up. Jae-young's eyes locked onto the untouched, full glass of water on the table, silently wondering why the other person hadn't drunk a single drop. She was completely speechless, wondering if anyone in the world could truly be so strangely obsessed with a single seat. Facing the strange girl's mysterious smile and flushed face, a sense of unease welled up inside Jiyoung, leaving her to silently remark what an absolute weirdo she was. Standing stunned in the middle of the cafe, the poor girl in a male body could only stare wide-eyed in sheer astonishment at this utterly bizarre situation. Jae-young, in her brother's body, paused thoughtfully as she watched the figure of a stranger walking briskly across the street. She stood frozen, looking out the window, wondering what that guy was looking at to have such a calculating look on his face. Her shock peaked when she realized it was Pyo Yoon-jae, the very guy turning her life completely upside down. Yoon-jae leaned in close and delivered his final warning, promising to let everything slide if she committed to stopping her stalking and disappearing immediately. Faced with the baseless accusation, Jae-young could only shake her head frantically in denial, silently cursing herself for letting foolish thoughts sway her mind. She walked away weary and confused, privately wondering if she herself was secretly being stalked by someone, just as the rumors suggested. While lost in remorse for acting rudely toward Yoonjae, Jae-young suddenly shivered as she felt a familiar murderous intent from behind. Emerging with a sinister smirk in the shadows, Kang-hyun in his sister's body had officially found his prey and uttered a chilling threat. Without a shred of mercy, the tyrant yanked hard on the ear of his own body, causing Jae-young to scream in pain and beg for mercy. With a dark, rage-filled face, Kang-hyun relentlessly berated his sister for being an idiot who stalked the guy who rejected her, swearing to teach her a lesson. Jae-young repeatedly protested that she was just doing homework at the cafe, but her tyrant brother in her body dismissed it as nonsense and vowed to discipline her at the gym right away. With a tearful face and a burly body, she shouted, trying to explain that the person she had secretly liked all this time was someone entirely different. Those words brought Kang-hyun to a sudden halt, his suspicious glare locking onto his sister as he pressed to know who the lucky guy occupying her heart actually was. While Jae-young was still too stunned to react, the tyrant coldly asserted with total conviction that the person was definitely not Pyo Yoon-jae. Ignoring her painful cries from having her ear twisted, Kang-hyun continued scolding his sister as hopeless, forcing her to immediately give up her ridiculous stalking behavior. The true nightmare began when he declared he would make his sister undergo a workout routine 3 times more grueling than usual today. Horrifying memories of the gym and shouts urging her to do one more set rushed back, causing Ji-young to break into a cold sweat from psychological trauma. Racking her brain for a way to escape her fitness-obsessed brother's clutches, she told herself that if she got dragged away now, she would definitely not survive. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind. Ji-young pointed and yelled about a monster lifting a total weight of 600 kilograms, instantly distracting the tyrant. However, the target was just a bewildered pedestrian looking back, making the guy in his sister's body angrily confront her for daring to disrupt the disciplinary session. Kang-hyun smirked wickedly, silently cursing his poor sister as awful for daring to play tricks to fool him. He secretly despised Ji-young's act of pretending to be drunk to sneak off to sleep, telling himself he had been far too lenient by playing along with such a pathetic performance. Rage flared as Kang-hyun realized his sister dared to touch his precious dumbbells, exuding a suffocating pressure accompanied by a menacing declaration of war. His hand twitched calculatingly as he asserted that he had anticipated her tricks and had prepared a contingency plan since yesterday. Leisurely checking the location tracker on his phone, he smirked triumphantly as everything unfolded exactly according to his setup from yesterday. He coldly challenged her to keep running for another 100 days, claiming she would still be firmly in the palm of his hand with no escape. Meanwhile, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath from exhaustion, Ji-young could only sprint forward frantically, clinging to the faint hope of escaping her tyrant brother's claws. Yet Kang-hyun's terrifying shadow suddenly loomed right behind her, signaling he had found his target, and leaving the poor girl staring wide-eyed in utter horror. Ignoring his demands to stop, Ji-young mustered her remaining strength to run for her life in despair, wondering how he could pursue her so relentlessly. After an hour-long chase, she completely collapsed from exhaustion while the tyrant calmly mocked her, saying she would be caught sooner or later, so she shouldn't waste her energy in vain. Ji-young, in her brother's body, wondered how the tyrant could control her body to run so well, to which Kang-hyun casually replied that it was all about pacing. Gasping heavily in despair, she cursed her terrible luck as she realized she was about to be caught if she didn't find a way out quickly. Kang-hyun coldly commented on her breathing and declared he would add a running session to the end of the discipline, ordering his sister to quietly follow him. Feeling she had truly reached her limit, the poor girl panicked, thinking about the terrible nightmare if she fell into the hands of her gym-obsessed brother. Suddenly, a sharp car horn sliced through the tense atmosphere, startling Ji-young and drawing her attention toward the sound. She paused in the middle of the street upon seeing a luxury car appear, its driver looking at her with a curious expression. Turns out it was Do-kyung. He asked about their 10 o'clock class and politely offered his close friend a ride, making Ji-young burst with joy as if finding gold. Eagerly accepting with infinite gratitude, the girl urged her brother to quickly get into the car so they could escape the sight of the pursuer behind. Despite Kang-hyun shouting and demanding the other party get out of the car immediately, Do-kyung looked with suspicion at the weird expression of the sister. Amid the suffocating silence, Ji-young froze completely as Do-kyung suddenly leaned toward her, closing the distance between them like never before. Ji-young, in her brother's body, laughed awkwardly and waved her hand, telling Do-kyung he must have misheard, urging him to quickly drive away from there. Do-kyung paused thoughtfully, looking toward the car door where Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, was frantically screaming for the other person to step out immediately. His gaze deepened as he inwardly confirmed that the voice just now undoubtedly belonged to the sister, Ji-young, without a mistake. Seeing the situation turning chaotic, the poor girl in a male body frantically urged her crush to focus on driving because they were both about to be late for class. Do-kyung sighed softly and reassured himself that he might have misheard, mentally telling himself not to get too deeply involved in the daily bickering of these two siblings. After hearing the reminder to fasten her seatbelt, Ji-young breathed a sigh of relief, believing that no matter how strong her tyrant brother was, he could never catch up to a moving car. Yet in the darkness of the alley, Kang-hyun's face and his sister's body suddenly darkened with murderous intent, accompanied by a terrifying growl calling out Ji-young's name. He stood silently watching the shadow of the car fade away amid the roaring engine, secretly planning a bloody purge for tomorrow. Inside the car, The atmosphere suddenly turned suffocatingly quiet, leaving Jae-young clinging tightly to her backpack and silently cursing the awkwardness surrounding her. The white car rolled along the long road, marking the start of a calculated gambit prepar. Jae-young, in her brother's body, secretly observed Do-kyung with blushing cheeks, privately thinking that even though he didn't say a word, the atmosphere wasn't awkward at all. Looking at Do-kyung focusing on driving, she silently wondered if these two close friends were really this quiet around each other normally. Even though she knew keeping quiet was the best way not to blow her cover, being seated next to her dream guy made her so restless that she wanted to find any way to strike up a conversation. A brief memory rushed back, reminding Jae-young that she hadn't received any contact since their disappointing goodbye the day before. She tightly gripped her backpack, constantly guessing whether Do-kyung was truly busy with his own plans or with someone else. Suddenly a bold idea flashed in her mind. Jae-young told herself that polite greetings like this were inherently easy to blurt out between close friends. She recalled Joo-hee's explanations about her busy work and used that as an example to reassure herself that Do-kyung not texting was also completely understandable. Resolving not to be a coward for even one more second, she mustered all her courage to call out Baek Do-kyung's name directly to start the dramatic conversation. Jae-young hesitantly asked about his recent schedule, prompting Do-kyung to casually share that he was caught in a whirlwind of endless plans as the new semester began. Hearing about his packed gatherings with friends, the younger sister could only marvel at her crush's top-tier social skills, silently wondering what kind of appointments those actually were. Jae-young, in her brother's body, startled in surprise upon hearing the mention of today's party and privately wondered if things were going too far. Do-kyung casually complained about constantly being dragged to parties, then turned to ask for her opinion, leaving Jae-young flustered because she had completely forgotten about this event. With a blushing face, she awkwardly denied her interest, secretly admiring Do-kyung's terrifying popularity in the past. Seeing Do-kyung smile radiantly while teasing about her brother's gym obsession, Jae-young secretly feared that his godlike beauty would make all the female students in the department fall for him. The playboy continued to press about his friend's true interests, secretly mocking the fitness-obsessed guy's potential to stay single for life. A surging anxiety made Jae-young widen her eyes in despair. She felt her heart clench at the thought of her crush finding someone new at the gathering. Suddenly, the tarot reader's instruction came back to her as the only lifeline, asserting that a deep kiss with the person she loved was the key to returning to her old body. Despite the extremely ironic current situation, Jae-young couldn't stop herself from feeling restless when thinking about the potential risks of the upcoming party. With eyes full of determination mixed with anxiety, she silently made up her mind to do everything possible to keep Do-kyung by her side instead of going to that department gathering. In the quiet space of the car, Jae-young boldly pleaded with Do-kyung not to go partying anymore, secretly hoping he would understand her inner feelings. Jae-young blushed furiously upon realizing how overly sensitive her previous request was, while Do-kyung just stared wide-eyed in surprise at his friend's bizarre behavior. She panicked and covered it up by saying she only heard the party was very troublesome, then came up with the idea to urge her crush to use her as an excuse to decline the fun. Do-kyung showed clear disgust, silently guessing that this gym-obsessed guy was planning to ask him to go work out instead of drinking to protect his muscles. The playboy bluntly refused because he didn't want to lose his life in the gym like him, making Jae-young frantically explain that she didn't mean that at all. Yet, Do-kyung started a lecture about overtraining and demanded his friend learn to rest, making her silently cry out to the heavens for suddenly getting scolded. In a decisive moment, Jae-young came up with the idea to invite Do-kyung out for drinks with her to break all the rigid rules of her tyrant brother. Do-kyung excitedly agreed, wanting to break his friend's gym addiction, and privately hoped that alcohol would help cure this exercise-obsessed illness. Before the tempting invitation, Jae-young started trembling at the thought of being executed by Kang-hyun if she dared to drag this burly body out to drink alcohol. Hearing Do-kyung promise to cancel the department gathering if she agreed to drink, she disregarded everything and shouted her acceptance of the offer in sheer excitement. Inside the classroom, Jae-young in the burly body startled and answered the professor's roll call, her face still flushed red with restlessness. She anxiously recalled the scene of Do-kyung standing by the car a few minutes ago, when he offered to pick her up at 6 o'clock and asked for her opinion on choosing a bar for the evening. Jae-young replied with a forced smile, then felt immense private joy upon realizing she officially scored a private date with the handsome idol. Her soul felt like it was melting in a space of fireworks and resounding trumpets. Jae-young kept screaming in her mind about the chance to be with Do-kyung with just the two of them. Even with a heart full of sobbing over her secret feelings, she still tried to rationalize this action as an effort to return to her original body, hoping her brother wouldn't be too strict. Sitting quietly in the middle of the class, Jae-young began plotting a strategy to probe Do-kyung's preferences during tonight's meeting to prepare for the upcoming fateful confession. The memory of discussing ideal types with Joo-hee came back as a valuable hint, helping her pinpoint the opening question about his taste in a lover. Jae-young's eyes were heavy with thoughts on whether to ask about Do-kyung's fashion style or his dating criteria, leaving her awkwardly tossing and turning in her mind. Jae-young, in her brother's body, was astonished to suddenly see the name Pyo Yoon-jae appear right in front of her. Sitting in the back row, she was stunned to recognize the figure of the cold guy sitting in the front, silently wondering why he was here. The images of their continuous clashes over the past 2 days came rushing back, leaving Jae-young in shock upon realizing they were even in the same class. Looking at Yoon-jae's profile, she felt a fleeting twinge of pity for him for unintentionally getting entangled in this troublesome, ill-fated connection with her brother. The moment the roll call rang out, Jae-young hastily answered the professor, then reassured herself to turn the situation into a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She quickly launched Phase 1 of her approach project by sending a text begging Yoon-jae to turn his head and look at her just once. With calculating eyes, Jae-young resolved to present evidence proving her true identity before this class ended. However, the absolute silence from the other party made her start to worry, and she continuously texted to ask if he was falling asleep. Jae-young dropped her head onto the desk in extreme disappointment upon realizing his phone was on silent mode, signaling that Phase 1 had completely failed. Refusing to give up, she immediately initiated Phase 2 by preparing to throw an eraser at Yoon-jae to force him to pay attention to her. Jae-young, in her brother's body, hesitantly looked at the eraser and secretly worried that throwing something this big would hurt Yoon-jae. She started meticulously cutting the eraser into tiny pieces, telling herself that just a tiny crumb was enough to get his attention. A triumphant smile appeared on her lips as Jae-young firmly believed her plan would go perfectly this time. Looking at the miniature eraser piece in the palm of her hand, she was satisfied to assert that this size definitely wouldn't cause the other party any pain. With a decisive motion, Jae-young unleashed her fateful eraser throw, silently hoping it would hit the target. The eraser piece landed right on Yoon-jae's head, but Jae-young was stunned to realize that the guy didn't even show the slightest reaction. She dropped her head onto the desk in sheer despair, mocking her own abilities as Phase 2 failed miserably once again. After tossing and turning over it, Jae-young resolved to sneak down to the seat next to Yoon-jae to confront him directly. Yet right as she stood up, she froze when the professor's voice rang out, questioning if the student was having some kind of problem. Amidst dozens of eyes staring at her, Jae-young could only frantically rack her brain for a reasonable excuse to cover up her bizarre action just now. Jae-young, in her brother's body, was stunned when Pyo Yoon-jae finally turned his head to look back at her after so much effort. However, the guy's ice-cold expression made her shudder involuntarily, silently sensing a clear rejection. To execute her approach plan, she audaciously faked being dizzy to the professor, even though deep down she felt extremely guilty towards Yoon-jae. She quickly grabbed Yoon-jae's shoulder and earnestly asked the professor to let her and this friend go to the infirmary immediately. Yoon-jae was so bewildered he froze, irritably questioning when on earth he became friends with this weirdo. Ignoring the resistance, the professor casually allowed them both to leave, leaving Yoon-jae wide-eyed at this awkward situation. Jae-young gleefully tugged at his shirt, dragging the guy along, and secretly celebrated because her project to get his attention had miraculously succeeded. Standing in the empty hallway, the atmosphere suddenly grew tense as the two faced each other in an incredibly awkward state. Yoon-jae frowned in extreme annoyance, then coldly demanded her to clearly explain the concept of friendship she had just arbitrarily declared. Jae-young frantically apologized, explaining that due to the urgent situation, she was forced to use this method, so she could present evidence to prove the truth. Yoon-jae coldly questioned the so-called evidence, while Jae-young and her brother's body pressed, asking if he still remembered his promise from yesterday. She brought up his previous declaration that he would believe her if she proved her true identity behind this male appearance. A memory flashed back with Yoonjae's cruel threat, forcing her to drop out of school immediately if she failed the soul-swapping wager. Yoonjae smirked sarcastically and pressed, asking if she was planning to drag out the pile of nonsense her sister had babbled yesterday to deal with him. Under the other party's sharp gaze, Jae-young could only break into a cold sweat and anxiously await the next reaction from the prejudiced guy. Yoonjae put a hand to his forehead wearily, then bluntly commented that if everything was true, they should find a way to solve it instead of dragging it out like this. He fiercely criticized her bizarre behavior of casually going drinking, leisurely coming to class, and even stalking others in this ironic situation. A burst of rage made Yoonjae assert that he would never fall for the Cha siblings scam ever again. Jae-young desperately screamed an explanation that this was the absolute truth, asserting that she was the one who promised to present evidence today. Yoonjae let out a weary sigh, looking at the girl in the male body, and privately concluded that both siblings in this family seemed to have simultaneously lost their minds. Jae-young, in her brother's body, earnestly asserted that she was not scamming him at all and was trying her best to resolve the soul-swapping incident through her personal love life. However, she was suddenly stunned when a familiar yet haunting sound unexpectedly caught her ear, causing all her words to halt. The rhythmic sound of footsteps echoed through the quiet space, making Jae-young turn pale in terror, while Yoonjae was still bewildered, not understanding what was going on. She realized in shock that someone was heading this way during a time when all students were supposed to be in class. An ominous premonition struck, making Jae-young break into a sweat as she secretly guessed the identity of the person closing and was her tyrant brother. The decisive pace pounding against the floor signaled that the hunter was very close and preparing to capture his hiding prey. Turns out it was Kang-hyun in his sister's body. He looked at the location tracker on his phone suspiciously, wondering why his sister's location was showing up here. The tyrant scanned the room and called out Jae-young's name in a sweet yet murderous tone, demanding she reveal herself voluntarily. In a panic, Jae-young dragged Yoonjae away to hide inside a cramped bathroom stall, making the guy irritably question this crazy behavior. The poor girl hastily signaled to keep quiet and earnestly begged him not to make a sound, because if her brother caught her right now, her life would definitely be over. Yoonjae frowned in deep disbelief, questioning who on earth was threatening her life, forcing Jae-young and her brother's body to hastily explain that it was her tyrant brother who was occupying her own body. The panicked girl revealed that her brother misunderstood Yoonjae to be a piece of trash and believed his sister was madly pursuing him, while Kang-hyun's terrifying figure was still lurking right outside in the hallway. Sheer horror was written all over her burly face, as she imagined being crushed flat by her weight-obsessed brother if the two of them were caught hiding together right now. Yoonjae privately concluded that the other person had surely lost her mind completely, yet Jae-young still earnestly begged him to believe in the formidable strength of a monster who could lift over 500 kilograms. The phrase gym-obsessed maniac suddenly brought Yoonjae to a halt in thought, as if he was beginning to piece together the bizarre puzzle pieces from their very first encounter. He recalled the petite girl's shocking introduction in class when she confidently bragged about her insane weightlifting ability and declared she was only interested in those with real muscle. Yoonjae realized that those contemptuous remarks about half-baked gym-goers completely matched the other person's arrogant attitude during their very first clash. He stood quietly observing the anxious face of the person across from him, secretly feeling that something incredibly bizarre was hidden behind the towering appearance of his classmate. Jae-young's fear of being crushed by her brother's weights grew even stronger as she noticed a terrifying shift in the atmospheric pressure compared to yesterday. Meanwhile, Jae-young could only scream in panic that she needed to escape immediately, then instinctively bolted straight into the women's restroom, leaving Yoonjae standing bewildered as he watched her leave. Jae-young, in her brother's body, sobbed tearfully, privately blaming her own awful intelligence for not escaping her tyrant brother's relentless pursuit sooner. Amidst the suffocating tension, Yoonjae suddenly leaned in close and coldly ordered her to step outside quickly, leaving the poor girl holding her breath in terror. She frantically recounted the entire story of the soul swap caused by the tarot bracelet, hoping the fortune teller's presence at the school would serve as evidence to clear her name. The atmosphere suddenly froze when a phone vibration unexpectedly rang out, making Yoon-jae's convictions start to waver as he wondered if that absurd story might actually be true. Panicked, Jae-young thrust her hand into her pocket to silence the wicked sound, inwardly screaming why this call had to come at this exact life-or-death moment. In her flustered state, the phone unexpectedly slipped from her hand, making the poor girl cry out to the heavens in fear that she was about to be caught red-handed. The screen displaying "older brother calling" made Jae-young feel both desperate and heartbroken over the fate of the phone, which still had 18 months left on its contract. A sharp snap echoed, signaling that the phone was snatched right before disaster struck, saving the girl just in the nick of time. Yoon-jae looked straight into her eyes and suddenly declared he would place his trust in her just this once, causing the surrounding space to instantly fall quiet. Frozen by the cold guy's assertion, Jae-young could only stare wide-eyed in astonishment, privately wondering what on earth he was calculating. Yoon-jae coldly threatened that if she dared to lie, she would pay a heavy price, causing Jae-young and her brother's body to scream in panic, demanding he stop immediately. Just as he stepped out of the bathroom stall, Yoon-jae bumped right into Kang-hyun in the sister's body, who was radiating intense murderous intent upon seeing the guy he despised mysteriously appear. Kang-hyun scowled in deep annoyance, silently cursing his bad luck for having to clash yet again with the guy he had already blacklisted as trash. Yoon-jae's gaze turned cold as he privately felt that the girl's expression in front of him seemed to reveal all of her less than noble intentions. Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, immediately questioned why Yoon-jae was holding Jae-young's phone in his hand, his tone oozing suspicion and hostility. Facing the wicked smirk and overwhelming aura of the person before him, Yoon-jae secretly felt goosebumps, as this vibe felt identical to the guy who had picked a fight with him the other day. Even though his mind was still flooded with endless questions, Yoon-jae reassured himself that since he decided to trust the girl's explanation, he would temporarily stay calm. He casually recounted how the moment her older brother saw him in the restroom, he panicked, dropped the phone, and ran for his life in utter cowardice. Kang-hyun sighed wearily at his sister's clumsiness, then asked Yoon-jae to hand over the phone so he could deal with this mess directly. Yoon-jae slowly reached out his hand as if to return the item, but he didn't forget to attach an implicit declaration about his own generosity this time. Yoon-jae suddenly blocked the path and demanded to know why she had been ignoring his calls since yesterday, insisting that they set an official meeting date. Jae-young, in her brother's body, blushed in flustered embarrassment thinking about her crush, secretly planning a romantic date for today. Kang-hyun, in the sister's body, showed irritation at seeing the strange guy clinging to her again, immediately declaring he would be constantly busy to decline the meetup. Yoon-jae scowled, questioning her back about yesterday's promise of having free time, forcing Kang-hyun to use the excuse of being drunk to deny everything and insist there would be no meeting plans. Facing the other party's firm stance, Jae-young stood frozen in shock, growing fearful that the cold guy would ruthlessly cross her name off the group project. Yoon-jae continued to press her, bringing up that she was the one who suggested meeting over the weekend to finish the work because texting back and forth was too bothersome. Jae-young's eyes widened in sheer astonishment at the info regarding the group project, a concept that seemed entirely foreign to her overloaded brain at this moment. A brief memory of last night's scene suddenly flashed back, helping the poor girl realize that the mysterious meeting in the alley was actually just a study session. Text messages about her crying hysterically while drunk out with classmates suddenly popped up on the phone screen, plunging Jae-young into further confusion. Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, let out a weary sigh at the chaotic mess of his sister crying and doing group work, telling himself he seemed to be getting dragged into an overly complicated situation. Yoon-jae quickly snatched the violently vibrating phone to prevent exposure in the nick of time. Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, told himself he must confront her face-to-face to clear everything up, while coldly announcing he was very busy and forbidding the other party from reaching out first. The tyrant decisively turned and walked away after dropping an arrogant farewell, leaving behind a silence steeped in suspicion. Yoon-jae stared after that figure with a stunned expression, marveling in disbelief at the stalker girl's unbelievably rude communication style. Anger surged within him as he realized she only said what she wanted, and then casually walked off, just like the way he had been bothered on day one. The contradictory details about her reaching out first, yet being completely clueless about her role in the group presentation made Yoon-jae even more suspicious. The image of the poor girl crying miserably while asserting her innocence suddenly returned to him, leaving the cold guy's mind completely bewildered. He put a weary hand to his forehead, telling himself that he had truly stumbled into trouble by getting entangled in this bizarre mess. Jae-young, in her brother's body, stepped out with eyes sparkling in admiration, constantly praising Yoon-jae's nerve for successfully ditching her tyrant brother. Yoon-jae froze at the other party's bizarrely out-of-place reaction in such a dire situation, while Ji-young suddenly found the cold guy looking remarkably dazzling. Yoon-jae smirked and explained that Kang-hyun had definitely installed a location tracker app in secret to hunt her down, leaving Ji-young stunned as she realized the truth. The girl in her brother's body was beyond shocked, inwardly cursing her tyrant brother as a sneaky trickster for pulling that stunt while she was sound asleep. Witnessing the other person's naivety, Yoon-jae could only sigh in exasperation, privately mocking himself for having ever worried about such a fool. Ji-young hesitantly pressed to ask if he truly believed her now, leaving Yoon-jae no choice but to begrudgingly nod in forced confirmation. She burst with happiness, beaming with a radiant smile and repeatedly offering sincere thanks that someone finally believed her crazy soul-swap story. Looking at Ji-young's apologetic face as she worried she was ramble-babbling, a strong wave of guilt suddenly surged inside Yoon-jae. The poor girl began expressing worry about malicious gossip behind her back if people caught her walking in and out of the men's restroom unusually. Yoon-jae was stunned upon realizing her only request was to clear up the misunderstanding, whereas he was the one who had intentionally ruined her reputation at the party. Seeing his silence, Jae-young awkwardly retracted her plea out of fear that asking him was too much of a bother, telling him to just pretend he never heard anything. Standing before those resigned eyes, she privately feared that even such a small request was becoming too great a burden for Yoon-jae. Yoon-jae secretly blamed himself for acting selfishly, no different from the awful people who only cared about their own convenience all this time. He turned his face away awkwardly, then coldly declared he would agree to help her clear everything up, even while grumbling incessantly about how troublesome she was. Jae-young burst with joy and showered him with profuse thanks, forcing Yoon-jae to immediately demand she stop grinning happily in front of him because it made him feel utterly uncomfortable. The girl in her brother's body felt a wave of relief as all misunderstandings were finally resolved, beginning to form a better view of the cold guy's true nature. Shifting to the evening date, Do-kyung smiled and remarked that something very joyful seemed to have just happened, making his friend's mood unusually upbeat. Jae-young awkwardly touched her cheeks, mentally reminding herself to control her expressions well so as not to blow her cover right in front of her crush. Do-kyung expressed relief that his friend's burden was lifted, then enthusiastically suggested ordering a light snack for them both to eat. However, the girl's face instantly turned pale upon seeing the dish supposed to be enough to fill their stomachs that the handsome guy had just mentioned. Looking at the meager, elaborately presented salad on the table, Jae-young screamed inside at the absurdity, secretly blaming her crush's bizarre taste in food. Do-kyung casually opened a bottle of wine and asked if Kang-hyun had ever tried alcoholic beverages, making her weary to realize that this guy was just as much of a weirdo as her brother. Do-kyung casually mentioned he had never seen his friend drink alcohol, so he assumed he was anti-alcohol, while Jae-young silently thought that gym rats were human too. The playboy kept pressing about his friend's secret to abstaining until discharged from the military, growing curious about the true alcohol tolerance of the burly guy across from him. Jae-young suddenly recalled her dad bragged that her brother was a seasoned heavy drinker, so she privately guessed this body's alcohol limit must be sky-high. Do-kyung teased with a smirk whether protecting muscles was just an excuse to hide a weak alcohol tolerance, making her blush furiously as she declared herself a titan at the drinking table. To test his friend, Do-kyung revealed he could chug 3 bottles and proposed a bet that whoever passed out first would pay the entire bill. Jae-young boldly accepted the challenge, though deep down she couldn't help worrying about Do-kyung's insane stamina, wondering if she actually stood a chance of winning. Do-kyung smiled radiantly, offering early thanks because he was sure he'd get treated, while the poor girl was still burning with determination to fight to the end. Looking at her crush's mischievous expression, Jae-young felt secretly surprised to discover an interesting and slightly playful side completely different from his usual calm demeanor. Although enjoying this fresh atmosphere immensely, she reminded herself not to let her guard down, as this was the prime golden opportunity to execute her set plan. Jae-young summoned all her courage to probe whether Do-kyung had fallen for any lady during those countless parties, aiming to confirm if his heart was already taken. Do-kyung affirmed there was no one special and casually poured wine, making Jae-young eagerly press to ask about his ideal type. The playboy shared thoughtfully that he had never really given deep thought to it, leaving behind a silence full of contemplation. With eyes full of concentration, the girl in her brother's body pressed, asking what his answer would be if he were forced to give one. Do-kyung narrowed his eyes slightly, looking off into the distance, and uttered a mysterious, making the other person wait in tense anticipation. A flash of memory returned with Kang-hyun's pale face along with harsh curses claiming his sister had completely lost her mind. Do-kyung's hearty laugh suddenly burst out, making Jae-young irritably question if this was an appropriate time to be joking around. Do-kyung smiled and explained that he found his friend acting unusually weird today and only really believed it was Kang-hyun when he started snapping. Jae-young blushed furiously, secretly resenting her brother's rude treatment toward her crush, and adamantly demanded he reveal his type right now. Do-kyung issued a challenge requiring the other party to drain the glass if he wanted to know the secret, prompting her to do so instantly alongside a stern threat. With eyes burning with determination, Jae-young waited anxiously for the moment Do-kyung officially spoke up, telling herself she wouldn't let him tease her ever again. Do-kyung began opening up about his ideal type, causing the atmosphere in the pub to suddenly become exceptionally deep. Yet Jae-young and her brother's body suddenly blushed bright red, frantically realizing she couldn't register a single word. A thud echoed as the burly guy suddenly collapsed onto the table, officially bringing the date to a shocking close. Do-kyung stared wide-eyed in amazement at his best friend lying motionless, secretly wondering if this was a practical joke. The handsome guy hurriedly leaned down to check the situation, asking in exasperation whether the other person had actually just passed out. Witnessing the flushed face sleeping like a log, Do-kyung was left utterly speechless, realizing the pathetic alcohol tolerance hidden behind those burly muscles. After a mere 20 minutes and a single glass of wine, Do-kyung had to accept the harsh reality and prepare for an unexpected ending. Silence enveloped the inside of the taxi as Do-kyung wearisomely played guardian, bringing the drunkard home in exasperation. The playboy sighed softly, looking out the window, quietly mocking his friend's misplaced confidence in trying to act like a seasoned heavy drinker. Jae-young groaned softly in her drunken state, while Do-kyung inwardly concluded that it was an overinflated ego that pushed her brother into this tragicomic plight. Do-kyung looked at the drunk guy in the car and reminded him that they were almost there, so he should wake up soon, while privately telling himself he must collect a sponsorship fee for this troublesome evening. The playboy frowned slightly in annoyance as he heard a murmur demanding 5 more minutes of sleep coming from the back seat. Showing no mercy, Do-kyung directly slapped his friend's face and yelled, demanding he wake up immediately. Even though the other party was still groggy, he continued landing light slaps accompanied by a harsh warning that he was not allowed to go back to sleep. Jae-young and her brother's body woke up in panic, shouting at Do-kyung to stop the violent behavior immediately while he casually urged her to get ready to get off the car. She rubbed her bloodshot eyes, privately shocked to realize the voice just now belonged to Do-kyung and wondering why they ended the drinking session so quickly. The announcement that they had arrived at XX Dong rang out, making Ji-young startle as she realized this was the familiar neighborhood where she lived. Do-kyung casually told the driver he would drop his friend off here and head right back, leaving the poor girl staring wide-eyed, wondering why he knew her home address so well. Watching Do-kyung prepare to leave, Jae-young began to feel extreme panic, privately begging him to get out of here because an ill omen enveloped her. Her terror peaked when the haunting figure of her younger sister in a bear costume suddenly appeared, dropping sarcastic remarks about the wild partying that left Jae-young standing frozen. Jae-young, in her male body, cowered in fear, silently begging Do-kyung to take her anywhere as long as she didn't have to return home right now. Do-kyung smiled in amusement seeing his best friend suddenly terrified, casually reminding him that the fierce Cha Kang-hyun was standing there waiting. Showing no mercy, He dragged his friend right out of the car and called Ji-young's name, demanding both siblings stop making a scene and get inside quickly. Standing before death's door, Ji-young in her burly appearance sobbed wretchedly, asserting that if she stepped inside, she would definitely not survive. Do-kyung's eyes suddenly turned dark and sinister. He smirked, threatening that he also really wanted to finish off his friend, promising to prepare plenty of condolence money. Drenched in sweat from fear, the poor girl frantically searched her brain for an escape route upon realizing Do-kyung was actually going to escort her home to face punishment. In the midst of desperation, memories of her father returned with a bright smile, reminding her of the ultimate trick whenever she needed to beg for help from others. The image of a little child with big, sparkling eyes emerged as a hint for the ultimate weapon called acting cute to soften the heart of the person before her. Without wasting a second, Ji-young suddenly lunged forward and tightly hugged Do-kyung's waist, leaving the playboy standing frozen in shock from the overly sudden contact. She shouted words of love for her father while tightly clinging to Do-kyung like a living shield, resolutely declaring she would never leave him to go inside. Do-kyung froze when he saw his friend suddenly call out to his father, privately wondering what trick he was pulling, but still asserted that this guy couldn't be anyone's father. Ji-young, in her brother's body, continued her pitiful act, sobbing as she begged Do-kyung to please help her this time, because she really didn't want to face the storm. Witnessing tears rolling down his friend's inherently masculine face, Do-kyung began to feel bewildered, wondering if the guy was truly about to cry just over not wanting to go home. She sobbed, promising that as long as she was helped just this once, she would be completely obedient and stay entirely quiet for the rest of the ride. Do-kyung sighed wearily, beginning to consider whether he should let his friend crash at his place if the guy hated going home that much. He slightly narrowed his eyes, observing every tiny expression on his friend's flushed, drunk, and tearful face to search for any signs of deceit. The wretched pleas continued without end, making the atmosphere inside the car extremely tense and tragic. Finally, faced with a relentless onslaught of tears, Do-kyung was forced to surrender and declared he would take his friend to his private apartment to take refuge. The scene quickly shifted to a modern, luxurious apartment, where silence began to envelop after a turbulent night. Ji-young, in Kang-hyun's body, was completely out of power at this point, sleeping soundly on the bed with her face still carrying a slight blush after the intense drunk episode. Ji-young groaned in her drunken stupor while lying on Do-kyung's bed, her mind spinning with chaotic sounds surrounding her. Trying to open her heavy eyes, she was shocked, wondering what hellish place she was in and what had just happened to her. Suddenly, a beautiful girl with bright golden hair appeared before her eyes. She smiled, realizing that the honored guest had finally woken up. With a radiant face, the girl greeted Kang-hyun and expressed her delight at seeing him show up at her house at this hour. Ji-young was bewildered, wondering if this was a dream where Do-kyung suddenly turned into a girl, but the girl quickly introduced herself as Baek Ji-na, Do-kyung's younger sister. The news that her crush had a younger sister made Ji-young's mind completely freeze. She privately blamed herself for missing such crucial information. Ji-na enthusiastically suggested that Kang-hyun drop by often, leaving the girl's soul inside the male body only able to stammer out questions in complete surprise. The younger sister explained that whenever he was here, her older brother Do-kyung would agree to come home earlier than usual instead of intentionally avoiding her like before. For the sake of family peace, she earnestly hoped to receive help, while Ji-young, still groggy, privately thought that seeing family less often would actually be better. Facing the blunt remark about family affection, Ji-na just laughed it off and once again begged Kang-hyun to do his best for her sake. Ji-young, in her male body, repeated the name Baek Ji-na in shock, while the beautiful younger sister casually stood observing her reaction. Just at this moment, Do-kyung casually walked out of the bathroom half-naked and muscular, coldly yelling at his sister that he told her not to enter his room without permission. Witnessing the ultimate view right before her eyes, Ji-young saw stars, her face turning red as a ripe GAC fruit, only able to spout hidden curses in her mind. The tiny girl's soul nearly exploded, her mouth hung open in astonishment, wondering what miracle of nature she had just witnessed right in this room. Do-kyung looked at his sister with contempt and stated he was not happy at all to see her here, ordering her to stop pulling stunts and get out immediately. Ji-na casually shrugged, smiling as she told Kang-hyun that her brother was always cold to his sister, so she would slip away before he really lost his temper. Before leaving, the mischievous sister intentionally leaned in close to remind Jae-young not to forget that she promised to help her. Ji-na casually waved goodbye with a radiant smile, leaving behind an extremely awkward atmosphere between the two in the spacious room. Do-kyung confusedly turned to ask his friend what help his sister was talking about, causing Jae-young to startle and stammer out a denial, saying it was just a trivial matter not worth mentioning. Do-kyung smiled and told her to ignore that nonsense, while poor Jae-young could only look down at the floor, not knowing where to fix her eyes before her crush's seductive body. Ji-na thoughtfully reminded Kang-hyun that she had prepared all the necessary personal amenities right by the sink for his convenience. Jae-young, in her male body, began spiraling into extreme panic as she realized she was about to share a bed with her secret crush. She inwardly screamed because she hadn't even had the chance to confess her feelings yet, and things had already progressed in such a strange and embarrassing way. Her face burning like fire, she continuously hypnotized herself into believing she was now her older brother Cha Kang-hyun to hold onto her last shred of sanity. In the quiet darkness of the room, her eyes remained wide open and restless, telling herself that there was something even more important than her embarrassment right now. Looking at Do-kyung's back, Jae-young felt guilty that her presence forced him to sleep in such cramped and uncomfortable conditions. She suppressed a quiet sigh, heartbroken thinking that she originally only wanted to show the best sides of herself in front of the one she loved. Unexpectedly, Do-kyung spoke up, shattering the silence with a sincere apology, expressing that he truly felt awful about what had happened. He explained that it was simply because he didn't want to see his friend waste time at useless parties he had no interest in to begin with. With a deep, warm voice full of remorse, he hoped the other would forgive him if his actions felt like an overstepping intrusion into his private life. Jae-young tossed and turned, privately thinking that Do-kyung's cold attitude toward his sister earlier was vastly different from the warm older brother image she knew, while he casually suggested she could drop by whenever she didn't want to go home. Her eyes flickered with sadness as she wondered if he was intentionally avoiding his family, longing to help him even just a little bit. She was about to call Do-kyung's name, but then quickly deflected with a forced smile, leaving him to quietly observe every strange move of his close friend. Faced with Do-kyung's suspicious question, Jae-young stammered, asserting that her family loved him very much, while deep down her heart nearly exploded from fear. Do-kyung chuckled, teasing her terrible alcohol tolerance and threatening to humiliate her to everyone, forcing her to offer up a whole pile of precious protein bars to swear him to secrecy. Sensing his friend's sincerity, he decided to let it slide this time, letting Jae-young breathe a sigh of relief as the gentle idol in her heart had finally returned. Do-kyung casually urged her to go to sleep quickly to enjoy the happiness of the night. Both exchanged good-night wishes and sank into the room's quiet space. However, the extreme closeness made the young girl's soul lose all drowsiness, anxiously wondering how she could close her eyes next to the one she loved. Ironically, the instincts of the gym addict body began to awaken as Jae-young unconsciously hogged the entire bed, pushing poor Do-kyung into a cramped, infuriating corner. Warm morning sunlight gently touched the armchair in the room, marking a promising new morning after a rather restless night for them both. Kang-hyun stirred slightly as the morning sun hit his face, slowly coming out of his stupor with a body feeling heavy, as if he had just been through a battle. His eyes suddenly widened in suspicion as he felt an unusual crampness, privately wondering why the familiar space had become so suffocating. He groaned exhaustedly upon realizing he was in an extremely awkward situation, right on his best friend's bed. Kang-hyun was beyond shocked to see Do-kyung sleeping soundly right next to him, a reality that panicked him to the point where his mind nearly exploded. His face darkened in horror as he privately questioned why this man could casually lie next to him like this. Without hesitation, he delivered a thunderous kick that sent Do-kyung flying onto the floor, shouting to ask why he dared invade his private space. Do-kyung tumbled onto the floor groggily, scratching his head in utter bewilderment at being awoken by a sudden attack first thing in the morning. Kang-hyun expressed utmost disgust, loudly berating his friend for giving him a haunting glare that gave him goosebumps. Do-kyung casually brought up the overly cheesy plea from last night and interrogated whether he had truly forgotten all the creepy things he had done. Kang-hyun froze with an expression overflowing with embarrassment, gritting his teeth in blame toward Jae-young for using his body to cause a sensational scandal. Do-kyung began the morning by turning to interrogate his best friend about the bizarre actions he did yesterday. The image of the burly man sobbing wretchedly and begging for help replayed in Do-kyung's mind as proof of last night's instability. Kang-hyun, back in his actual persona, yelled in anger, firmly refusing to continue the story and making the atmosphere intensely tense. Do-kyung casually noted that his friend was hiding a secret and pressed to know why he intentionally avoided going home so badly. Kang-hyun's face turned thoughtful as he secretly guessed that his younger sister Jae-young had used his body to beg Do-kyung for a place to stay. To cover it up, he coldly made up a story that he had just gotten into a fierce argument with Young, piquing Do-kyung's curiosity about the cause of the fight. Do-kyung recalled Kang-hyun's past habit of complaining about every little thing, noticing that today's attitude was genuinely unusual. He stared intently into Kang-hyun's eyes, which were still groggy from the alcohol, asserting with certainty that a secret plot was being hidden. Not wanting to press his friend further, Do-kyung stood up, inviting him downstairs to eat, and announcing that his mother was preparing hangover soup. Kang-hyun just stood frozen with a blank face, bewilderedly repeating the phrase hangover soup, in shock at the extreme hospitality of his friend's family. Do-kyung mentioned that his mother insisted on cooking hangover soup for his friend after seeing him carry the dead-drunk Jimmer home. Kang-hyun, back in his own body, was utterly appalled to hear he had collapsed pathetically after just 2 tiny glasses of soju. The horror of a fitness monster struck when he realized putting alcohol into his body would destroy all his hard work and cause severe muscle loss. He could only clutch his head and laugh in agony at this humiliation, leaving Do-kyung standing nearby worried, wondering if his friend was hallucinating. With a solemn face, Do-kyung offered to call a taxi for his friend and expressed his intention to check the situation himself, feeling something was off. Watching Do-kyung's back, Kang-hyun radiated dark murderous intent, gritting his teeth as he swore his younger sister Jae-young would pay with her life for ruining his image. With his rage reaching its peak, he kicked the door open and burst into the room, roaring Jae-young's name to prepare for a bloody family purge. Yet, Kang-hyun suddenly froze upon seeing his younger sister sitting comfortably at the dining table with their mother, hastily calling him over to introduce a strange guest. His anger quickly turned into astonishment when he realized the young woman was Jang Han-na, the fake tarot fortune teller who started all this trouble. Kang-hyun narrowed his eyes calculatingly, realizing the presence of the old woman sitting B. The old lady Park Ok-ryan appeared under the title of a powerful shaman, casually announcing she had grasped the situation from Han-na and demanding the 2 siblings sit down to talk. Kang-hyun pulled out a chair with a resentful face, dropping a threat to settle the score with Jae-young later, leaving the poor younger sister cowering in fear. Sitting opposite their only savior, he crossed his arms impatiently and pressed to ask if she could instantly break this wicked body swap spell right now. The old woman shook her head, explaining that the bracelet was made when her spiritual power was at its peak, so during her current unlucky year she couldn't intervene directly to fix it. With a stern face, she emphasized that being careless during an unlucky year would lead to unpredictable disasters, a prime example being the body swap incident between the 2 of them. Kang-hyun sighed in utter disappointment, speaking up to criticize the shaman for dragging them both here without preparing any specific solution. The old woman casually asserted she never said it was unsalvageable, but instead of waiting for her, the fastest way was for the 2 siblings to find a way to break the curse themselves. Amidst the quiet space of the room, Kang-hyun pressed to ask when they could return to normal and was shocked to hear her predict it would be in the fall, or might even last until winter. His rage erupted, making him jump up and scream, vehemently opposing having to live in his sister's tiny body for half a long year. To defuse the situation, the shaman placed a large wad of cash on the table and declared this was compensation for mental damages as well as tuition fees drawn directly from her granddaughter, Han-na's wallet. Kang-hyun, in the male body, questioned the swapping method, but the shaman emphasized that the key lay in mutual trust and acknowledgement. Both siblings repeated this daunting request in shock, as in their eyes, the other party held absolutely no trustworthy value. The old woman continued to explain that their ancestors borrowed the bracelet's power to force the two siblings to learn to understand and grow closer to each other. Hearing this, Kang-hyun flared up, asserting that their past life was originally very peaceful, while the present was nothing but trouble and chaos. Unfazed by that irritability, Old Lady Park casually looked straight at him and began a psychological interrogation. The question about whether he had ever truly trusted his sister made Kang-hyun pause, complex thoughts beginning to ripple in his mind. Images of the past returned when Jae-young's soul in his burly body was desperately trying to explain her personal hobbies and the disastrous misunderstandings. Returning to reality, Kang-hyun bitterly declared he would rather believe in Buddha, simultaneously dropping an insult about Jae-young's intelligence. A war of words erupted when Jae-young sarcastically remarked that her brother's brain was made entirely of muscle, making him unable to think things through like a normal person. The peak of outrage came when Kang-hyun threatened her over the drinking incident, only to be mocked back by his sister about his pitifully weak alcohol tolerance. Shaman Park directly landed a painful knock on Jae-young's head, sarcastically asking what right she had to act so proud after the chaotic mess she had just caused. A burst of rage made the old woman scream loudly, demanding both siblings shut up immediately, asserting that these beatings were necessary for them to come to their senses. The atmosphere in the room suddenly turned bleak, as both had to bow their heads and take the scolding, while the old lady casually noted that the lack of trust between the two was the very root of the curse. Old Lady Park sternly advised that the only key to breaking the spell was mutual trust and acknowledgement, leaving Kang-hyun privately doubting his ability to understand his sister. Faced with these lectures on family bonds, Jae-young could only mutter resentfully that it was her brother's dictatorship that made her life constantly encounter hardships. Silence enveloped the entire kitchen when the old woman softly uttered a single word demanding order, enough to instantly extinguish the arguments that were just sparking. The shaman's reprimands echoed throughout the neighborhood all day long, filling the space with a harshness that made the sky itself seem suffocating. Until dusk fell, that pressure-filled lecture showed no signs of stopping, dragging on persistently like a torture for the two siblings. It wasn't until late at night that the sound of the door latch echoing signaled the strict shaman had finally ended the turbulent meeting and was preparing to leave. Old Lady Park casually said goodbye while promising to soon send supportive items through Hanna, leaving the Cha siblings in a state of exhaustion after taking a severe scolding together. Jae-young stood frozen in a daze, her mind still swirling with the lectures on trust, and secretly praying the shaman wouldn't abandon her. The space in the room suddenly became terrifyingly quiet, leaving the two siblings in an endless psychological battle right after the door closed. The younger sister began executing her escape plan with the most stealthy footsteps possible, telling herself to be incredibly careful not to alarm the person sitting behind her. Ironically, a curt call rang out, making Jae-young jolt in panic, her tiny soul seeming to want to fly out of her body in fear of being caught. With a darkened face full of dark aura, Kang-hyun slouched on the chair and coldly interrogated where she was planning to escape when things were still not fully resolved. She stammered, asking back about settling the score, while her whole body couldn't stop trembling under her older brother's razor-sharp gaze. Kang-hyun casually listed a series of rules that needed rectifying, placing special emphasis on her crime of sneaking around using his body to go drinking time and time again. In a moment of peril, Jae-young tried to flash a flattering smile and reiterated Old Lady Park's advice on trust, hoping to use it as a shield to soothe his anger. Smirking maliciously, he declared he had found the ideal location to build trust and ordered her to have exactly 3 minutes to get ready to head out. Sheer terror showed on Jae-young's face as she realized that fostering sibling bonding according to Kang-hyun meant exhausting hours of training at the gym. The friend with the red headband couldn't hide her shock upon hearing about the chaotic mess that had just happened at the freshman's introductory party. Walking beside her was Pyo Yoon-jae's older sister, who was sighing in regret because her matchmaking intention had turned into a disaster when it made a girl burst into tears. The older sister advised her friend to stop meddling in other people's business, but the friend insisted that without this intervention, Yoon-jae would be lonely until old age. The debate turned comical when the older sister bluntly criticized her friend for having an outdated mindset and being overly nosy, just like an old fogey. Despite the sarcasm, The young girl still believed her efforts were for Yoonjae's benefit, even if the younger brother always considered it a pesky annoyance. Frustration welled up as she recalled her younger brother's ruthless attitude toward her, despite how much effort she had put into worrying about his happiness. In the midst of her engrossed complaining, she suddenly stopped when she saw a familiar figure strolling in the distance and hurriedly asked the older sister for confirmation. Both were stunned, unable to believe their eyes as they witnessed a cold guy like Pyo Yoonjae casually walking alongside a girl in broad daylight. Their amazement turned into extreme astonishment when they realized that girl was none other than the poor victim from the argument at the party the other day. Meanwhile, Jae-young was staring at her phone screen with a look of disgust, secretly cursing her older brother Kang-hyun as a guy with only muscles instead of a brain. Jae-young looked at the menu full of dry chicken breasts sent by her brother, shivering inwardly at the cruelty of a fitness maniac. Meanwhile, Kang-hyun and his sister's body had to nibble on a triangle rice ball, worrying about the future of the muscles he had painstakingly built. Ironclad rules were officially established, forcing both to install a location tracking app and report their daily schedules in detail. Kang-hyun's fury exploded through text messages upon seeing a meal lacking protein. He didn't hesitate to threaten his sister for daring to neglect the nutrition regimen. Jae-young sluggishly typed on the keyboard, explaining that the high-intensity exercises he forced on her left her legs so worn out she couldn't even go eat a proper meal. Amidst the conflicts, the shaman's warning about mutual trust and acknowledgement echoed once more like a compass to break the curse. With a stern face, Old Lady Park demanded the two siblings always engrave this lesson on family bonds in their minds to avoid disasters in the future. Ever since the pressure-filled meeting with the shaman, a few things in the lives of the Cha siblings had begun to quietly change. They made an effort to control their anger through promising text messages, trying to maintain a fake atmosphere of peace to overcome the ordeal together. Jae-young knelt down to explain her purely platonic relationship with Pyo Yoonjae, trying to build a fragile trust even though both their hearts were still full of doubt. Jae-young told herself she also had to make an effort since her brother was trying his best. She made up her mind not to let herself be cowardly anymore. While her mind was struggling, Do-kyung's warm, deep voice unexpectedly rang out greeting her, making Jae-young snap out of her train of thought. She looked up in astonishment at the idol standing before her. He smiled politely, asking for permission to sit next to her during class. Do-kyung casually sat down and thoughtfully asked if she had a fun weekend. Hearing him say he just rested at home, Jae-young couldn't help but be surprised, recalling his previous remarks about busy plans. Do-kyung explained that because he was too tired, he canceled all his schedules to recover, making her secretly breathe a sigh of relief. Looking closely at his face, Jae-young worriedly asked about his health when she noticed the exhausting dark circles clearly etched under her crush's eyes. The playboy casually reassured her not to worry, because the reason he lost sleep last night was none other than Cha Kang-hyun. Do-kyung half laughed and half cried as he accused his best friend of tossing and turning all night, clinging to him without letting go, leaving Jae-young only able to stammer out explanations in embarrassment. The girl screamed in agony in her mind, secretly questioning her ugly sleeping habits and feeling so guilty she wanted to die. Do-kyung suddenly turned to ask Jae-young if she was free tomorrow, making her jolt in shock. He smiled, bringing up the promise to treat him to a meal, and pretended to be heartbroken, fearing she had completely forgotten this important date. Jae-young panicked and clarified, asserting she had been saving every penny of her living expenses just to prepare for this meal with her idol. However, Do-kyung unexpectedly suggested moving the schedule to the day after tomorrow instead of tomorrow, making her excitement suddenly halt. She blankly pressed for a reason, unable to hide the disappointment in her heart at this sudden change of plans from her secret crush. Noticing her confusion, Do-kyung quickly explained that he was just curious and wanted to know if something was bothering her. Jae-young honestly shared about the pile of assignments and her promise to go to the gym with her brother Kang-hyun, secretly feeling the surrounding atmosphere had seemingly just shifted. The playboy happily locked in the date for the day after tomorrow, making the little girl's soul melt in a space overflowing with romantic pink hues. She hurriedly asked about her crush's food preferences and was stunned when the name mocha pasta slipped from his seductive lips. Do-kyung casually revealed that the restaurant was near the school and he had seen her like it on social media, while being ready to cater to her wishes if she wanted to change the spot. Do-kyung smiled gently, asserting that he wasn't a picky eater at all and hoped Jae-young wouldn't feel too pressured about the location for their upcoming date. Jae-young's face turned beet red upon realizing he still remembered small details about her, secretly cursing him as a sinner who specialized in stealing maidens' hearts. She boldly declared she would cover everything from the main meal to coffee and demanded he leave his wallet at home, leaving Do-kyung only able to laugh in anticipation. His eyes suddenly became deep as the soft sound of the classroom door rang out, signaling the brief private moment between the two had ended. Professor Shin-mi walked in with a radiant aura, cheerfully greeting the whole class and hoping everyone had a great weekend. Do-kyung casually reminded Jae-young to mentally prepare herself because the new semester had truly begun the moment the instructor stepped up to the podium. While the professor asked the students to keep quiet to start the lesson, Jae-young was still immersed in the happiness of sitting next to her idol. The classroom space was suddenly filled with the murmurs and discussions of students, creating an incredibly lively atmosphere. The professor's unexpected question about ideal types during the introductory session made Jae-young slightly flustered and start to think aimlessly. A series of standards from tall and cute to handsome emerged like perfect puzzle pieces of many girls' dream lover. A few students clamored to request a partner change or same-sex pairing, but Professor Shin coldly refused, leaving Jae-young only able to squint her eyes trying to clearly see the name list. She continued her lecture on an interesting fact that a person's ideal type is often completely opposite to the person they actually date in real life. The professor's assertion received huge agreement from the whole class as many students excitedly admitted they had fallen into such ironic situations themselves. The reason given was extremely simple. People don't just love based on rigid standards, but also because of mutual understanding and unexpected shared values. Diverse experiences are what truly create attraction. She emphasized that love is an emotion cultivated from a relationship, not a checklist. Hearing this, Jae-young sneaked a glance at Do-kyung and wondered if she still had a chance to make his heart flutter, even though she might not be the type he was looking for. Do-kyung maintained a calm expression with his arms crossed over his chest, casually listening to the professor's lecture on the psychology of love right beside her. Professor Shin officially announced the partner list for the next assignment on the big screen, requesting everyone to quickly write down the name of the person who would accompany them. This task required couples to talk for at least 2 hours and submit an experience report, making Jae-young secretly feel this was an incredibly fascinating topic. The report's content had to include first impressions and changes in perspective about the partner, while the professor was ready to answer any final questions before ending the class. Jae-young held her breath listening as Professor Shin confirmed there were still some assigned same-sex groups for this practical assignment. She was stunned when she saw line number 20 on the list, where her name was placed next to her nemesis Pyo Yoon-jae with a highly ironic heart symbol. The little girl's soul felt like exploding. She stammered the other person's name in sheer shock at Destiny's cruel joke. Meeting Yoon-jae again outside the classroom, Jae-young tried to force a strained smile to greet him and express her surprise at this bizarre coincidence. However, Yoon-jae's stone-cold face and dark eyes made her shiver, privately feeling he was even scarier today than usual. She timidly suggested they both find a nearby cafe to discuss how to execute the group report together. Yoon-jae dropped a highly reluctant agreement with an annoyed attitude, leaving Jae-young bewildered and afraid, not knowing what she had done wrong. She hurriedly took out her phone to text a status report, her heart overflowing with unease when thinking about the upcoming 2 hours filled with pressure. Their heavy footsteps slowly treaded across the schoolyard, signaling a not-so-smooth start to this collaborative relationship. Yoon-jae sighed heavily with a gloomy face. He secretly cursed his terrible mood at having to be involved in this mess all day long. Yoon-jae frowned thoughtfully as he began analyzing the true reason why his mood had become unsalvageably terrible. He silently blamed Jae-young because her gloomy funeral-like face was the biggest factor ruining the relief after last week's conversation. Looking at the figure of the petite girl who always stealthily avoided and cowered whenever near, he felt as if he was being treated like a criminal. Yoon-jae's eyes turned razor-sharp with suspicion, secretly hypothesizing whether she was intentionally acting to look pitiful in front of him. Losing patience with her slowness, he coldly reminded her that if she didn't want to go, she should just speak up so they could both finish the group assignment individually. The vibrant, rosy image of Jae-young when beside Do-kyung suddenly flashed back, making Yoon-jae feel extremely irritated at this double standard. With a resolute attitude, he told himself he wouldn't let himself be swayed by the ambiguous and baffling actions she was intentionally displaying. Yoon-jae was determined to put an end to all unnecessary concern, secretly asserting that from now on he had no obligation to fulfill any of her requests. He stopped in his tracks in the middle of the vast campus, softly letting out a heavy sigh to suppress the frustration building up in his mind all day long. Finally, Yoon-jae angrily turned around to scold and demand that Jae-young be quiet, instead of constantly making annoying panting sounds right behind his back. Jae-young hesitantly explained that walking for her right now was truly a difficult ordeal due to the aftermath of heavy weightlifting workouts. Yoon-jae coldly stared intently at her and sarcastically pressed to ask if she was also having trouble breathing as well. The image of her gesticulating wildly while explaining how her older brother Kang-hyun forced her to work out at the gym for 2 whole days over the weekend appeared hilariously. Yoon-jae looked in disbelief, questioning if just because of muscle soreness she had to drag herself along so pitifully all day long. He crossed his arms, questioning why she had to trudge all the way to the school gate when there were plenty of other cafes nearby. With an apologetic face, Jae-young expressed her gratitude that he had believed her and wanted to make it up to him with a really delicious meal. Yoon-jae looked at her with a judgmental gaze, privately deeming the logic of wanting to buy good food just because of feeling guilty as laughably absurd. He sighed in annoyance, coldly ordering her to try and keep moving because this delay was completely ruining his mood. Jae-young tried to chase after him in tears, her aching legs constantly protesting, leaving her only able to scream inside at her partner's harshness. Suddenly, something appeared before her eyes that left Jae-young stunned, her mouth hanging open in surprise with a giant question mark popping up in her mind. Jae-young wondered what was happening as she noticed Yoon-jae's attitude had undergone a strange, slight shift. She secretly observed and realized her partner's walking pace seemed to have slowed down to wait for her instead of striding hastily like before. At the checkout counter, the staff began listing a long, winding menu of pastries from tiramisu to croissants. Jae-young's face suddenly turned dark and gloomy upon hearing the other party continue to demand a whole slew of macarons and iced coffees. The tiny girl's soul practically froze, her mouth hung open in shock, wondering if this guy was planning to eat the entire restaurant menu. Yoon-jae casually declared he needed to load up on sugar to regain balance after the stressful moments spent beside her for 2 hours. Hearing such harsh words about how much he detested her, Jae-young could only force a wry smile and secretly curse the unfairness. Showing no mercy, he continued to add a list of luxurious desserts from waffles to fruit-shaved ice. Yoon-jae coldly finished ordering and requested that she quickly order her share, so the discussion could officially begin. Jae-young sluggishly ordered a single hot Americano for herself, secretly telling herself this would be an arduous afternoon beside her nemesis. Jae-young was horrified when the cashier announced the bill came to over 180,000 won, aching inside because this amount was enough to buy a mountain of hamburgers. Even though her heart ached terribly, she gritted her teeth and held out her card, telling herself she would have to tighten her belt all month long to compensate for this generosity. Suddenly, a powerful black card reached out from behind, directly blocking the poor girl's card payment at the register. Yoon-jae casually instructed the cashier to charge his card instead, leaving Jae-young staring wide-eyed in amazement at his domineering intervention. He decisively rejected the cashier's offer of an installment plan, while Jae-young was still standing dazed, unable to process the situation that had just unfolded. She hurriedly voiced her objection, asserting she was the one hosting this meal and demanding to know why he suddenly insisted on paying. Yoon-jae coldly retorted that he had never accepted her offer to treat him, declared that he utterly hated owing debts, and warned her not to do unnecessary things. The harsh remark about unnecessary things left Jae-young deeply hurt. She stood silently frozen with a gloomy and aggrieved face. A feast filled with luxurious pastries and desserts was beautifully set out, marking the start of 2 hours of high-pressure discussion for the pair. Sitting across from her amidst the pile of pastries, Yoon-jae sarcastically brought up how her hands had been trembling and asked if she should be grateful that he paid instead. Jae-young timidly explained that she had no bad intentions, Though her hands were still trembling, she offered to give Yoonjae a fried chicken discount coupon as an apology gift. Yoonjae casually dug into the pile of pastries, coldly rejecting the gift and telling her to stop doing useless things since they were now even. Looking at her partner's unpredictable expression, Jae-young could only sigh inside, privately wondering whether he was actually a good person or just a mean jerk. Setting those worries aside, she stole a glance at him and began to feel something incredibly bizarre was unfolding right before her eyes. Witnessing Yoonjae continuously stuffing his mouth with chocolate cake bites, Jae-young privately guessed that he must be feeling extremely stressed sitting across from her. Wishing to quickly end the suffocating atmosphere, she proactively suggested cutting down the 2-hour conversation required by the professor to a minimum. Under Yoonjae's suspicious glare, she hesitantly suggested they spend only 30 minutes on Q&A to gather report data and get it over with. Seeing her partner nod in agreement for efficiency's sake, Jae-young secretly breathed a sigh of relief, while Yoonjae began to view the rationality of her actions more favorably. She continued outlining a plan to exchange personal preferences via email to save time, while aiming to focus on expressing shifts in perspective regarding each other. In a serious tone, Jae-young listed a series of tough topics on life values and hidden inner thoughts, hoping to genuinely understand who Yoonjae was as a person. Yoonjae stole a glance at Jae-young and secretly acknowledged her competence, realizing she hadn't gotten into this university through any favoritism. For her part, Jae-young proactively initiated the conversation to prevent her partner from misunderstanding that she was trying to get close to or had feelings for him. She recalled memories of her brother rudely interfering in her dating life and asserted that she utterly loathed such meddlesome behavior. Yoonjae also expressed empathy upon remembering his sister who meddled in his private life, silently swearing he despised those who tried to control others' lives. The unexpected mutual connection eased the suffocating atmosphere, and both decided to move on quickly to the next question to finish the group task early. When asked about his thoughts when alone, Yoonjae casually replied that he just wanted to go home immediately, making Jae-young want to wrap things up quickly as well. Contrary to the initial pressure, the dialogue went quite smoothly as she shared her perspective on the importance of trust in every relationship. Yoonjae casually observed that words can be fake but actions cannot, asserting he always judged people by how they behave. Time passed faster than expected when the phone on the table suddenly vibrated, signaling that 30 minutes of official discussion had closed. Jae-young smiled in satisfaction as she rechecked her phone notes, telling herself this information was enough for her to write a complete report. Jae-young looked at her phone and suggested ending the discussion here. Yoonjae nodded in agreement, secretly surprised that she kept her 30-minute promise and starting to view her character more favorably. Jae-young thoughtfully opened up that money was currently what she valued most because she didn't want her parents to carry the financial burden for 2 college students. Witnessing the surprisingly practical side behind her exterior, Yoonjae privately thought this girl possessed a personality trait vastly different from her usual image. Jae-young proactively offered to draft questions to send via email and urged him to reply early, her decisiveness leaving Yoonjae only able to nod quietly in agreement. He secretly admitted today's conversation went much more pleasantly than expected, as she exhibited none of the annoying, clingy attitude of other girls. A sudden fluttering thought crossed his mind, startling Yoonjae as he wondered what on earth he was daydreaming about right now. He tried to push aside his confusion upon realizing he was caring too much about her, while Ji-young hesitantly covered her mouth, saying she still had one final question. Yoonjae closed his eyes and sighed exhaustedly, feeling drawn into her rhythm, urging her to quickly state her intention. Ji-young leaned in close and whispered a question about the ideal type presentation, earnestly hoping he would recount what her brother occupying her body had stated before the class. Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, loudly declared that his ideal type had to be stronger than him and held extreme contempt for those with lukewarm muscles displayed just for show. Listening to the story at the cafe, Ji-young could only scream internally because her brother's madness had completely ruined her gentle image. She trembled with resentment upon realizing why all the seats around her were empty, while Yoonjae secretly deemed this to be the true person he had known. Ji-young held her head in anguish, imagining Do-kyung witnessing the whole scene as well, beginning to resent her brother for hiding such a terrible thing. Yoonjae crossed his arms and coldly questioned why she bought that disastrous bracelet, asserting that she was an idiot who brought trouble upon herself. She fiercely denied it and explained that she didn't want her life turned upside down either, while accusing her brother of constantly ruining her love life since childhood. With sad eyes, Ji-young poured out her heart, saying she simply didn't want anyone interfering when she was trying to express sincere feelings to the person she truly loved. Yoon-jae smirked sarcastically, pressing to ask if it was worth risking everything just for something trivial like dating, not hesitating to insult her as a fool. Refusing to back down, Ji-young snapped back that he had no right to judge when he himself was taking the exact same love and culture class as her. Seeing her intentionally put on a challenging, teasing face, Yoon-jae flew into a rage, asserting he had his own reasons and mocking the absurdity of their current situation. Yoon-jae sighed heavily, placing all the blame on his older sister Pyo Ji-yoon, while Ji-young secretly thought he didn't need to explain anything further. He gritted his teeth in anger upon realizing he was being held by the throat by the girl before him, making the atmosphere suddenly grow intensely tense. Yoon-jae suddenly shouted her name, startling Ji-young, who trembled and shrank back under the pressure of his razor-sharp gaze from across the table. With a dark face, he asserted he was taking this class entirely because his sister forced and registered for him, without even 1% of his own willpower involved. He snapped, asking if she clearly understood the situation, leaving Ji-young only able to murmur fearfully that she had no objections. Suddenly recalling past events, Ji-young's face turned bright red as she loudly asserted she never had a crush on dark-haired male leads, aiming to dispel his misunderstanding. Returning to reality, she crossed her arms and noted that Yoon-jae must also feel deeply troubled by his sister's overbearing interference. Ji-young continued to vent her resentment over being forced by relatives to do things they deemed right, regardless of how contrary it was to her thoughts. Yoon-jae listened silently as she wondered why older siblings were always so excessively obsessed with their younger siblings' dating lives. Unexpectedly finding mutual ground, Yoon-jae blushed and admitted that was his exact thought as well, secretly thrilled to finally have someone on his side. Yoon-jae frowned, complaining about how sick he was of his family constantly pressuring him about dating and the major matter of marriage. Ji-young also immediately chimed in with a rant about the excessive interference from her older brother, who always loved to micromanage her private life. The scene at the Criteria Cafe appeared completely tranquil, marking an important turning point in the relationship between the two kindred spirits. Standing outside the glass window, Pyo Ji-yoon crossed her arms to observe and couldn't help but be stunned to catch her younger brother sitting with a strange girl. She grinned in immense excitement seeing her notoriously cold younger brother actually smiling and chatting so comfortably. Ji-yoon secretly admired Cha Ji-young's adorable appearance and was amazed at how easily she had won Yoon-jae's affection. Recalling the rumor that this petite girl had once made her brother shed tears, Ji-yoon was both worried and secretly hoping the secret would soon be revealed. Noticing the atmosphere between the two progressing incredibly romantically, she decided to retreat early to leave them some private space. Ji-yoon softly muttered, scolding Yoon-jae as a jerk for keeping this a secret, while resolving not to let him off the hook when he got home. In a dark corner, Kang-hyun gritted his teeth in indignation seeing the male partner still daring to hover around his younger sister despite the stern warning from before. Kang-hyun gritted his teeth in indignation, cursing Pyo Yoon-jae as a leech for continuing to hover and cling to his younger sister. He secretly regretted not beating the guy to a pulp that day and spared no words insulting the lackey that the other party's parents had given birth to. Suddenly, Pyo Ji-yoon appeared right behind him and spoke up to greet him, making Kang-hyun startle and turn around with a highly vigilant face. With her protective nature toward her family, she bluntly questioned what right he had to dare talk about beating or insulting her younger brother like some thug. Kang-hyun was stunned upon realizing the woman in front of him was the older sister of the extremely rude bastard he absolutely despised. Ji-yoon immediately bristled in defense, asserting that Yoon-jae was actually an incredibly sweet and kind-hearted boy, not at all evil like he said. Hearing her stammering, he sarcastically brought up how Yoon-jae had cruelly broken his sister's heart and made her cry for his own amusement. Ji-yoon was momentarily flustered, trying to explain that there must definitely be a misunderstanding here because even though her brother was rude, he was absolutely not scum. Kang-hyun coldly brushed off all explanations about a misunderstanding, resentfully criticizing her for failing to properly educate her younger brother. Insulted to the breaking point, Ji-yoon flew into a rage, asserting that Yoon-jae was actually a child with a warm heart and swore she would never let anyone who dared to humiliate her brother off the hook. Kang-hyun showed a careless attitude, asserting he didn't care about Yoon-jae's image at home and only found it annoying that the guy kept clinging to his sister like a leech. Ji-yoon immediately bristled to defend her brother, sarcastically asking back what her Yoon-jae lacked that he had to chase after his sister, and asserted the opposite was actually the truth. Kang-hyun smirked in mockery, exposing that Yoon-jae's gaze toward Ji-young was as sweet as honey, and didn't forget to denounce his own sister's radiant smile. Seeing Ji-yoon stubbornly making excuses for her brother's natural smile, Kang-hyun immediately proposed that both of them go verify the truth on the spot. Their eyes clashed, sparking electricity, creating an intensely tense confrontational atmosphere as neither was willing to back down regardless of the surrounding space. Meanwhile, from another angle, Ji-young and Yoon-jae were still bewildered, not understanding what was happening, with incredibly pitiful expressions. The fateful encounter took place when the two pairs of siblings officially faced each other in the middle of the cafe, leaving Ji-young and Yoon-jae completely petrified in amazement. Ji-young cried out in panic, asking why her brother was here upon feeling Kang-hyun's hand roughly grabbing her collar from behind. Ignoring his sister's confusion, Kang-hyun growled, questioning whether she and that jerk truly had no shady relationship, with a face full of murderous intent. Too exhausted by his baseless suspicion, Ji-young yelled, blaming her brother for bringing up old matters again, and asserted she had texted to inform him about the group assignment session beforehand. Kang-hyun sarcastically asked his sister why she was smiling so foolishly while doing assignments, asserting her expression back then was so sweet it made others sick. Ji-young angrily shouted, asking her brother why he continued to tail her even though he promised to trust her, leaving Kang-hyun only able to use the domineering logic of an older brother to cover it up. Ignoring the noise opposite them, Ji-yoon suddenly turned to interrogate Yoon-jae about whether he had truly developed feelings for that petite girl. With a resolute face, she declared that Ji-young was an absolutely unacceptable choice, leaving Yoon-jae only able to bewilderingly urge his sister to speak human language. Ji-yoon flew into a rage, swearing she would never let herself become in-laws with the rude guy who is Ji-young's brother out of her pride as an older sister. Witnessing his sister's overly extreme expression, Yoon-jae secretly deemed that she had completely lost her mind and wondered what on earth she had been listening to. A mischievous thought suddenly flashed in Yoon-jae's mind. He silently gasped in amazement upon realizing this was the golden opportunity to turn the tables. Without hesitation, he used his unlimited black card as bait to force Ji-yoon to compromise, striking directly at the greed of a sister who always valued face. Yoon-jae secretly calculated that if this plan succeeded, he would be able to make his sister retract her absurd dating enforcements from before. The argument between the Cha siblings erupted again as Ji-young resentfully blamed his rough interference, while Kang-hyun growled, demanding his sister choose a decent person to date. Ji-young indignantly stated that her brother would never be satisfied with anyone she dated, even if it was a perfect person like Do-kyung. Suddenly, she paused amidst the heated argument when a bold thought unexpectedly popped into her mind, making her face turn pensive. She silently thought she was hiding her feelings for Do-kyung, so letting everyone misunderstand her relationship with Yoon-jae right now was a perfect shield. Noticing her meaningful silence, Yoon-jae stepped forward and loudly declared that everything now depended on his own approval. The eyes of the two nemesis suddenly became razor-sharp and synchronized, marking the formation of a temporary alliance to deal with their annoying older siblings. Yoon-jae decisively reached out and grabbed Ji-young's shoulder to assert dominance, ordering the two people opposite them to be quiet and listen. With a dark face full of pressure, he asserted that both were adults and had the freedom to date without anyone's permission. Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, flew into a rage, demanding the jerk take his hand off, while Ji-yoon also screamed in vehement opposition to this relationship. Ignoring the rough interference, Yoon-jae casually rested his hand on Ji-young's head and demanded the two of them stop meddling so deeply into his private life. He smirked sarcastically, bringing up his sister's previous urgings to date, and asserted he was just doing exactly what she wanted, leaving Ji-yoon seething in helplessness. Jae-young angrily yelled that what her brother saw wasn't everything, and demanded he stop arbitrarily deciding everything, because she wasn't anyone's private property. Witnessing the excessive intimacy between the two, both Kang-hyun and Ji-yoon trembled with anger in an atmosphere that was suffocatingly gloomy. Yoon-jae smirked in mockery, declaring he still had a lot to say, but currently both were busy for their important date. He casually reminded the two of them to take care of their health, then left the cafe radiantly alongside Ji-young, leaving those behind in sheer amazement. Witnessing an actual dating scene right before their eyes, both Kang-hyun and Ji-yoon fell into a state of severe psychological shock seeing Yoon-jae proactively invite the other party to dinner. Jae-young, in her brother's body, stared blankly at the couple's fading backs, silently calling the name of the loyal lackey with a highly bewildered face. From a distant corner, Do-kyung quietly observed everything with thoughtful eyes and secretly concluded that the relationship between those two seemed incredibly close. A silent atmosphere enveloped the space as hidden secrets were gradually revealed through every tiny, meaningful gesture. As for Yoon-jae, he felt immensely refreshed, as if he had just shed a burden that had been clinging to him for 20 years, and enjoyed an unprecedented sense of triumph. He silently laughed in satisfaction because even though he had insulted his sister many times, he had never felt as excited as when he saw her face filled with pure indignation. Yoon-jae smirked triumphantly, silently asking Jae-young if she had seen his sister's expression of utter indignation just now. The joy was short-lived as he suddenly paused, shocked to discover she had collapsed to the ground because her legs were in too much pain. He frowned in reproach, arguing that if her legs weren't okay, she should have spoken up earlier instead of stubbornly dragging herself after him like a fool. Jae-young flew into a rage, lunging to grab Yoon-jae's shirt and yelling that she had been constantly crying for help, but he only kept running like a madman. She resentfully criticized his detestable 180-centimeter stride that made it impossible for her to keep up, forcing a flustered Yoon-jae to offer an apology. The scene shifted to a field of brilliant yellow flowers, marking the moment they both tried to calm their souls after the chaotic moments. Sitting on a stone bench under the streetlight, Yoon-jae hesitantly brought up the intimate act they had just put on in front of his sister Pyo Ji-yoon. He cautiously explained that it was just a last resort to escape and hoped no misunderstandings would arise between them. Jae-young bluntly extinguished all hope, declaring that even if they were the last two people on Earth, she would absolutely never bother glancing at him. Yoon-jae awkwardly asked himself why he had to act so submissively around this girl, while Jae-young decisively demanded to leave because the group assignment was finished. Jae-young held out a tube of ointment, leaving Yoon-jae stunned. She explained that she had used a cotton swab to apply the medicine, so it was very clean. Seeing the other party still bewildered, she pointed to the wound on his face and admitted that the pain had been bothering her the whole time. Yoon-jae awkwardly accepted it, silently thinking this girl was truly strange for carrying all sorts of random items in her small backpack. Jae-young decisively turned her back to leave, but didn't forget to look back and remind him to return home a little late to keep up the act in front of her brother. Yoon-jae stood silently watching her leave, secretly marveling at her lightning-fast change in attitude, from blazing anger to caring concern. Witnessing her struggling, limping walk under the streetlight, he softly remarked that she truly was an eccentric girl. He began to recall his incredibly terrible first impression when she had frantically used a bracelet to justify her crazy stalking behavior. Although he once considered her an extreme nuisance who always dragged him into suspicious situations, deep down he had begun to waver. Yoon-jae realized that sitting together and complaining about their families forcing them into marriage turned out to be comfortable and not forced at all like he had feared. Watching Jae-young strictly check the time to end the discussion on schedule, he secretly appreciated how she always maintained a proper distance. Jae-young firmly asserted that even if they were the last two people in the world, she would never like Yoon-jae, a clear rejection without any hesitation. Looking at her radiant, relieved face when she said thank you, Yoon-jae secretly felt a newfound trust gradually building after their misunderstandings. Sitting at his desk to finish the report, he secretly admitted that the crazy body swap story was real because that girl didn't seem smart enough to keep up a lie for that long. The email notification chime rang out, bringing Jae-young's proactive message, making Yoonjae silently pleased to see that she was a person who highly valued keeping her word. The image of her decisively declaring she would never develop feelings for him once again appeared in his mind like a weighty reminder. Yoonjae rested his chin in deep thought, secretly hoping she would keep that promise, so his life wouldn't be further disrupted by unnecessary feelings. The exhausted stretch after finishing his work signaled a brief moment of silence before the family troubles started to emerge. At her house, Jae-young was busy organizing documents for tomorrow's group discussion and mentally preparing herself to confess the shocking truth to her parents. She secretly imagined her mother's realistic reaction of demanding the siblings quickly swap back to their old bodies and not forgetting to put the shaman's compensation money into savings. However, her biggest worry was her father returning soon after an 8-month business trip, leaving Jae-young terrified he would collapse from the shock of his two children's bizarre body swap. Jae-young was sitting at her computer when she suddenly heard the doorbell signaling a family member's return. She cheered inside with excitement, thinking her father had finished his business trip. She hurriedly ran out to open the door and loudly welcomed her father with overwhelming happiness after a long period of separation. However, Jae-young immediately froze when she saw her father didn't return alone but came with Baek Do-kyung, who was smiling and greeting her very amicably. She stammered his name in shock and extreme amazement, silently wondering why the man of her dreams could inexplicably appear next to her father like that. Meanwhile, Kang-hyun's soul residing in his sister's body squinted in suspicion, sensing an unexpected shift taking place right in the living room. The scene of their father excitedly clinking glasses with Do-kyung appeared, as he loudly declared himself the one who defeated Kang-hyun at the drinking table, leaving both siblings in severe shock. Her mother, Choi Mi-hyun, suddenly appeared with an icy face radiating intense pressure, demanding a satisfactory explanation for this extravagant drinking session. Her father immediately rushed to hug his wife to express his longing, completely ignoring her dismissive attitude due to the strong stench of alcohol reeking all over him. With teary, emotional eyes, her father placed his hand on Do-kyung's shoulder and explained that he had to drink with him because this young man carried an incredibly tragic life story. Facing the entire family's questioning looks, Mrs. Mi-hyun squinted at Do-kyung and directly interrogated him to see what on earth had happened between the two of them at the drinking table. Do-kyung put on a pitiful face, recounting that he had just had a fight with his parents, so he packed his bags and left home with nowhere to turn. He hesitantly confided that his melancholy led him to accidentally run into Mr. Cha and pour out all his hidden feelings to the stranger right on the street. Standing observing from a distance, both Kang-hyun and Mrs. Mi-hyun narrowed their eyes in suspicion, secretly guessing that this sly fox was intentionally timing it perfectly to approach the honest father. Faced with her father's excessive hospitality, Do-kyung was hugged tightly by him and encouraged to stay here as long as he liked to clear his mind. Realizing the situation was gradually becoming complicated, Mrs. Mi-hyun softly whispered to Kang-hyun, discussing that it was best to keep the secret until Do-kyung left out of fear that the father would accidentally reveal everything. Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, stared intently at Do-kyung with a razor-sharp face, secretly calling the name of his scheming best friend who was blatantly playing tricks right in his own house. Witnessing Do-kyung casually asking their father for care while the father bawled and demanded he just call him dad, Kang-hyun silently asserted this guy had absolutely no intention of leaving anytime soon. He quickly pulled his mother to a corner, earnestly begging her and his father to find a way to keep Do-kyung busy for at least the next 2 hours. Kang-hyun's eyes suddenly became dangerous, secretly resolving not to waste this opportunity and preparing for a harsh training plan. Jae-young, in her brother's body, could only silently obey, while the true older brother's soul was plotting to use this time to completely subjugate and retrain his younger sister. The bubbling pot of soup along with fragrant slices of beef on the stove emitted a sweet aroma, marking a new, turbulent beginning for the Cha family. The father and Do-kyung were coordinating perfectly in the kitchen when they suddenly noticed the presence of the two siblings who had just returned home from their workout. The father smiled radiantly, asking if both had a good morning workout, leaving Jae-young in her brother's body only able to stand silently behind Kang-hyun. Do-kyung casually turned around, thoughtfully urging them to quickly go wash their faces for breakfast, because the delicious dish he helped prepare was almost done. Kang-hyun, in his sister's form, squinted thoughtfully, silently recalling how his best friend had curiously asked about the strange things happening in his house not long ago. He secretly guessed that Do-kyung had definitely noticed something abnormal and was intentionally using the tactic of winning over the father to go undercover, right in his own lair. Her father excitedly declared that Do-kyung was the gold standard for a husband, making a resentful Kang-hyun silently curse his friend as an annoying bastard if he dared to use this secret to torment him. Faced with the father's excessive praise regarding marriage, Do-kyung could only smile bitterly and sarcastically remark that his old-fashioned views seemed to come straight from the Joseon era. Even though he had trained his sister extremely thoroughly yesterday, Kang-hyun still felt uneasy facing the superior sharpness of the guy standing opposite him. With a meaningful smile appearing on his lips, he secretly resolved to put his full trust in his sister's act to deal with his cunning best friend. The father eagerly invited the muscular Kang-hyun to eat, making the older brother's soul occupying his sister's body silently gloat about the power of his special training course. With eyes glaring fiercely, Kang-hyun secretly ordered his sister to quickly make her move to extinguish the enthusiasm of those around them. Suddenly, Jae-young, in the muscular form, radiated a cold, gloomy aura and dropped a ruthless dismissal, leaving both the father and Do-kyung in a state of severe shock. She followed up with a critical blow by declaring she would never consume that car bomb, an off-script improvisation that made Kang-hyun extremely satisfied. Although the pause before speaking was a bit awkward, her harshly hardened face completely overpowered the sharpness of his cunning best friend. Her father panicked and explained his son's eating habits to defuse the situation, while Do-kyung could only smile bitterly because he was too used to this ungrateful attitude. To salvage the atmosphere, Kang-hyun, in his sister's body, flashed a radiant smile promising to eat his brother's share as well, catching the two men completely off guard. Her father excitedly demanded to polish off 3 bowls of rice in response, creating an opportunity for the two siblings to quickly retreat and continue their plan to kick the annoying intruder out of their nest. Jae-young, in her brother's body, let out a soft, bitter laugh, feeling exhaustion gradually engulfing her mind after the highly dramatic act. Sitting blankly with lifeless eyes, she secretly cursed her brother as a true devil but had to bitterly admit the undeniable effectiveness of his ruthless training course. Kang-hyun loudly announced the start of Phase 1 of the special training course, forcing his sister to only consume protein shakes for the entire duration of Do-kyung's stay. Jae-young was so bewildered, she was left speechless. She couldn't understand what on earth hiding their identities had to do with that drink exclusively for gym bros. Her brother casually scolded her for being an idiot and asserted that if they weren't careful, his cunning best friend would soon expose their act right in their cramped house. With a face full of smugness, Kang-hyun asserted that protein was the master key, a god-tier solution to turn his sister into his perfect replica. Although her heart was full of skepticism about her older brother's personality, the cruel reality afterward proved this gym addict's calculations were absolutely correct. The nightmare began when Jae-young had to run 15 kilometers on an empty stomach after 18 hours of fasting, secretly cursing the devil's cruelty. The purpose of starving her was to push her irritability to the peak, causing Jae-young's soul, even though she was crying inside from hunger cravings, to still blurt out the harsh dismissal exactly according to script. Not stopping there, Kang-hyun proceeded to Phase 2 by forcing his sister to practice screaming the insult continuously for an hour until it became instinct. Jae-young horrifiedly asked if her brother had truly lost his mind, but the effectiveness of this bizarre training was undeniable. The result was clear when she casually dropped a harsh remark on an acquaintance, making the other party mistakenly think it was just a typical edgy morning greeting from the muscle guy. Jae-young and the muscular body started applying the harsh training by decisively brushing off a classmate asking about the opening party. She continued dropping dismissive words on another schoolgirl asking for a favor, causing the other party to not only not get angry but secretly admire the usual badass style of the muscular guy. Witnessing the unimaginable reactions from everyone, Jae-young horrifyingly asked herself if letting her brother roam free in society all this time was a hazard. Sitting blankly in the middle of the schoolyard, she felt as if this world was broken upon realizing a normal conversation could operate smoothly using only insults. Jae-young tore at her hair in despair, silently lamenting that having to continuously mutter vicious words was turning her brain into mush due to extreme hunger and thirst. Suddenly, Pyo Yoonjae appeared and shattered the gloomy atmosphere. He cordially called her senior and shared that he had to search everywhere for her. Jae-young in the masculine form could only stare blankly at him in astonishment, secretly surprised by the sudden eagerness of the cold guy. Yoonjae flashed a rare, radiant smile, gently scolding her for not checking his messages and expressing concern that something terrible might have happened. Even though her body was protesting violently due to hunger, Jae-young still mechanically dropped a dismissive remark, secretly cursing the poorly timed appearance of this annoying guy. Yoonjae sincerely suggested they both go eat and discuss work, leaving Jae-young completely paralyzed as a delicious bait was inviting her right when she was most exhausted. Jae-young in the muscular body was completely stunned upon hearing food mentioned, her mind beginning to sway violently from the gnawing hunger. In her rosy imagination, Yoonjae appeared like a generous god, ready to offer her a lavish feast of all culinary styles. She tried to maintain her mask by stammering a dismissive remark, but the heart inside that burly chest was beating frantically at his eagerness. Unable to resist the appeal of the delicious bait, she devoured the protein-rich meal with relish and silently gave thanks for the lifesaver right in her moment of exhaustion. Witnessing her fearful attitude of being punished by her brother if she ate too much, Yoonjae secretly concluded that although her personality was a bit silly, this was the true Cha Ji-young. Yoonjae criticized her older brother's dictatorship in controlling even her diet, leaving Jae-young only able to awkwardly make excuses that it was due to unforeseen circumstances. She sincerely expressed her gratitude that he had saved her from starving due to the harsh protein diet, making Yoonjae secretly admire the other party's fierce vitality. The atmosphere suddenly turned serious when Yoonjae unexpectedly changed the subject, pressing to ask for the real reason that brought her all the way here to meet him at all costs. With a hesitant and pensive face, the normally cold guy suddenly became awkward, as if he were hiding an unspeakable secret. Yoonjae finally mustered the courage to ask for an important favor, leaving Jae-young completely bewildered by the sudden request from the opposite side.